Good afternoon. Thank you for coming today. I am Sue Plants. I'm with the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, Public Safety Communications, and I'm really pleased to have all of you show up at our rural town hall here in Humboldt County. And just a couple facility information. The restrooms are out the doors in the back. The men's is right across, and the women's is to the left. We will be having a little bit different format today. So it's going to be interactive. We really are asking for your participation, your questions, and there's either index cards on the table or you can wait for the microphone because we have quite a few people on our WebEx, so we want to make sure the WebEx participants hear our questions in the audience. And I'm pleased to introduce Karen Wong, our Assistant Director for California Public Safety for the Governor's Office of Emergency Services.
I'm not a real fan of microphones. Thank you everyone for coming today. I really appreciate all of you being here. We have been wanting to do a town hall that's a little bit more specific to our rural communities. California has a large rural community. So with this town hall, while we have all of you in the room, we have, I think it was 65 folks?
65
registered all the way down from San Bernardino County. So this is of interest to a lot of our rural community. What I first want to ask is how many of you know what FirstNet is? Oh, this is wonderful. You know, when we first started having our town halls, no hands were raised. So this is great. This is really, really good. For those of you who don't, I'm just going to give a real brief synopsis of what it is, but you will hear more about what FirstNet actually is. The Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act, and I always have to read that because I mess it up, was signed into law in February of 2012. In that act, there was initiative, Section 6 of the Act, to actually establish a nationwide public safety network and also a governing body, board of directors to govern that for the nation, which is FirstNet. So that's a real brief synopsis. You'll hear a lot more about FirstNet as we move through the day. So my role, one of the things that the Act had in there is that every state needed a state point of contact. So while I'm with the state governor's office of emergency services. This is a network that will be for all of our public safety. So it's for the state of California's public safety, it's for all the counties' public safety, all the cities' public safety, all the tribal public safety. It truly is across the board for everyone in California. So why it's so important for you to participate today is this is your network. And we need to hear from you, and as the state point of contact, I need to be able to know what you need, make sure we have the right contacts so we can get people out to talk with you to make sure this network is built to meet your needs. So that's why your attendance here today is so important. And so some of the challenges that we'll be talking about today and what we're looking at, we're very lucky to have both the chairperson from FirstNet with us today, our tribal advisor from FirstNet. We have a representative from Oregon and a representative from Nevada. And what we've been learning as we've been talking in California, Nevada, Oregon, and many of the western states, we have some common issues when it comes to rural areas. So our most northern part of California, issues for rural areas, for public safety and communications, also is southern Oregon, as well as Eastern California, Western Nevada. And this is a nationwide network. So those borders, when it comes to communications, will be broken down. So we will see true interoperability between the states, something that we've been struggling with LMR forever. This will be a broadband network that will be built with interoperability integrated into the network. It's going to look like your cell phone. Doesn't matter where you talk on your cell phone. It's interoperable. So when we look at California, I just kind of wanted to go a quick snapshot of what we have. And this has been scrolling for the last probably half hour or so. But we have roughly 2,000 public safety agencies, 58 counties, 478 incorporated cities, and 109 tribes. 5% of California is dense urban or urban. 81% is rural, which you are all representing today. And 14% is wilderness. So that will be the topic today. Our first town halls that we had were pretty much pushing information out to everyone. This town hall is the beginning of our new format. So what we'd like to see is interaction. We'll be taking questions from our folks on the webinar, and we definitely want you to have your questions. We have the right people in the room to help answer your questions today. Again, we want to hear from you through this whole process. And to get started, I'd like to thank Joanne Miranda for her assistance in coordinating the facility, Dory Lanny, Humboldt County Sheriff's Office of Emergency Services, for coordinating our local public safety panel members today, and then each of our panel members as well. We have Sue Swenson, who's the chair of the FirstNet, of our First Responder Network Authority Board of Directors, FirstNet, Carl Rebstock, First Responder Network Authority Tribal Outreach, George Molnauer, did I say that right? Close enough? George. Statewide Interoperable Coordinator, State of Nevada. Steve Noel, Oregon Statewide Interoperable Coordinator and FirstNet Single Point of Contact. Chris Emmons, I'm so bad with names, Battalion Chief, Humboldt Bay Fire. Louis Brunick, sorry. North Coast Emergency Medical Services Associate Director and Regional Disaster Coordinator, and Mike Boyden, Science Application International Corp, SAIC, who is our contractor to help gather this information and provide you information as well as we go through FirstNet. So before we get started, did anybody have any questions? Okay, be thinking about what your questions might be as we go through the day. Our first person that will be speaking will be Sue Swenson, and she will be giving you a FirstNet overview.
Good morning. How is everybody today? Good. Thank you for the beautiful weather. I understand this is not always normal for this time of year. I'm a Californian primarily. I've lived most of my life in California, although I was actually born in the state of Washington. So it's nice to be up here. I actually worked at Pacific Bell for a number of years and used to come up to Eureka because we actually had people working up here. So it's somewhat familiar territory and great to be back. So nice to be here today. My comments are going to be brief, and I really do encourage you to ask questions about FirstNet. It's a very unique opportunity for public safety, and I have to tell you, I'm very honored to be part. Oh, sorry, it's not loud enough? Oh, okay, let me. Oh, the webinar, you want me to hold it? Because I don't like to stand behind it. Oh, okay. I thought you were going to give me a mic. Okay, this is better. Yeah, I'm not used to standing behind a podium. So I want this to be very interactive, but I'm very honored to be part of this project. How I got involved in it was kind of unique. I was actually at the San Francisco airport, and someone called and said, I'm getting involved in this very interesting project. You might be interested as well, but you need to talk to somebody else to find out about it. And that's actually how I got involved in this project. My experience is in telecommunications. I've spent my whole career in either fixed line or wireless telecommunications software applications development. And there are 4 other members of the board who bring kind of a technology experience as well, along with public safety, and we'll get more into that board experience. But this is not my network, it's your network. Karen said it, it's really public safety's network. We're here to figure out what you need, how to build it for you so that you get the best from it. So we're only here to help architect it and figure it out, but it's not our network. So let me just walk through the information here pretty quickly about FirstNet. Karen mentioned this. This actually goes back a ways. You all remember 9/11, right? How many years ago was that? Quite a few years ago. And what came out of 9/11 was a 9/11 report that said one of the issues for public safety is they can't talk to each other. You know, they can talk to their own, but they can't talk to each other. And they felt that that was a big inhibitor to saving lives and dealing with the public safety emergency and the incident. So interestingly enough, public safety got together, a coalition of public safety people, law enforcement, EMT, fire, and actually lobbied Congress for 5 years. actually went back to the Hill and lobbied for public safety so that you could get spectrum and that money would be set aside to build this network. It took 5 years to do that. And that's what resulted in the legislation being signed in the year 2012. So your member, people from your organizations are the ones who actually made this happen. And then it became law in that period of time. Then, as part of this, what's always nice when you're a startup company is to get money. As part of this legislation, it authorizes $7 billion, and that's with a B, a nice little pot of money to get started. So $7 billion, and how we got that money is not from taxes. We're getting that from spectrum. I think you might all be familiar with maybe some spectrum auctions that are going on now where AT&T and Verizon and Sprint and all the people who are interested in spectrum are buying the latest AWS spectrum that's on the market. That spectrum, just interestingly enough, you might find it interesting, the FCC thought that was worth about $10 billion. It's now at about, oh, sorry. What do you want me to do there? Do you want to get me back? Oh, I'm already back. I'm already done. So take me back to that. That spectrum is actually right now at about $45 billion. That's how valuable that is. So the spectrum we got from Congress, 20 megahertz of spectrum for public safety, let me just tell you, it's worth a lot. And the fact that they allocated that is a big deal for public safety. So $7 billion and 20 megahertz of spectrum. Now, people say, you can't build a nationwide network for public safety with $7 billion. And you are absolutely right. But 20 megahertz of spectrum is a lot. I don't know how familiar you are with capacity and things like that, but when you take all the public safety people who would be using this, it still leaves a lot of capacity for other people to use that network. So part of the legislation is enabling us to not only build and have this network for all of you, including rural, not only urban but rural, and build that network, but to basically lease the excess capacity for those who want to pay us for it. So in addition to the $7 billion, what we're hoping to do is extract the value of that spectrum so that we have the money to not only continue to build out the network, but also to provide the resources and capital to upgrade the network as new technology comes out. And that's really important to operate and to build that. Because how many of your systems have been around for, I mean, what's the age of your systems today? 5 years? 10 years? What's that? I mean, what's the... Well, with narrowbanding, most of them are fairly new. Okay. Older, right. So, and then you have to wait to get grant money and, to upgrade that. I just want you to know, as we are thinking about this network, we're building it in an economic model that allows us to have the resources so that as new technology comes out, we can actually upgrade it when new technology comes out. So we're actually building that into the assumptions around that. So I think it's really important to understand that that's really how we're thinking about doing this. So I think that's really important because people say, well, does public safety need all that spectrum? Yeah, they do. They need it not only to use it when you need it, but you also need it for the resources so that you can operate and maintain that network over time. Because there are some people who say, well, you don't need that much spectrum. I mean, if it was only for your use, that would be the answer. But we need it all so that we can operate this over time. So that's obviously a very important component here. It's in Band Class 14. I know I'm not going to use too many jargons here. Band Class 14, this is beachfront property. Let me just put it in really simple terms. This is really, really good spectrum. You guys got some really good stuff. And it's going to be very attractive to those who want to lease it. So it's not spectrum that's not of interest or, has technical difficulties. This is really good spectrum. So that's, I think, really important. And 20 megahertz is a lot of beachfront property. So really you have a nice bit of spectrum. Let me talk about the board a little bit. Karen mentioned it. The board is made up of 15 people. There are actually 3 federal members, somebody from Department of Homeland Security, someone from the Department of Justice, and someone from the Office of Management and Budget. And those are permanent federal members. The other 12 members are kind of split between what I would call technology and public safety. So there are some of us who come from the wireless telecom industry, and the rest are made up of people from public safety. So we have Chief Johnson from Oregon, who's on the board and who's the vice chair now of the FirstNet board. We have Mayor Parker from Houston, who's just a new member of the board, so she represents local government. We have Chief Chris Burbank from Salt Lake City Law Enforcement Police. And we have Sheriff Stanek from Minnesota. So we have a sheriff on the board representing law enforcement as well. I have to remember all the people on the board. It's a large board, so if I've missed a few people, help me. Governor Douglas, ex-governor, he's an ex-governor on the board, and he was just recently appointed. He's a great board member who just joined us. We have Chief McGinnis from EMT, and so he was one of the original members, and he's continuing. Tim Bryan, who runs the National Rural Telephone Association, so he represents all the rural telephone companies, which are going to be important as part of this network. We have a gentleman by the name of Barry Boniface, who comes from the telecom industry, is involved in, has done a lot of spectrum work, so he understands the spectrum world. Ed Reynolds, who used to work at AT&T in operations, so he's very familiar with designing and building and maintaining networks. Who am I missing? Oh, Terry Takai, thank you. Terry Takai, the former CIO of Department of Defense, and she just recently left that job, and she now is back in the private sector in Michigan. She was also, I believe, the CIO for California and Michigan, right? Wasn't she? Michigan as well. So she brings great experience to the board. I think I hit everybody. I apologize if I've missed anybody, but like I said, it's a big board, but clearly the board is there to help provide direction to the FirstNet team that is actually building your network. So we provide direction. We're not doing day-to-day work. We did initially before we, it was in a very unusual situation because a board was established and we didn't have any employees. So actually Chief Johnson and one of our former board members, Craig Farrell, were out doing regional outreach. Some of you may have attended those. And so we actually did do quite a bit of work in the early days, but we're back, stepping back and taking board responsibilities. So for example, I will spend time going to Capitol Hill talking to our legislators about the progress of the project and communicating to our legislators about what's going on in those projects. And Chief Johnson and I have recently been out talking to many of the public safety organizations. We were out visiting with the IACP, International. I'm learning all these acronyms. You guys have so many acronyms. I guess every group does, right? But International Association of Police, Chiefs of Police. So we went out and met with their executive board. We were also out with the International Association of Fire Chiefs. He was back, Chief Johnson was back in Washington this weekend with the major cities chiefs. I guess that's a combined meeting between police and fire. Fraternal Order of Police. So we're going to go out and also volunteer firefighters. I think there's a meeting in June that we're going to be out talking to the volunteer firefighter organization because we really want to communicate what we're doing and how we're doing it and what it means for public safety. So we think it's really important, just like I'm here today, I think it's important for us to be here today to let you know how important the rural coverage is. And I'll go into a little bit about why that's important and why that's different. But that's our board. We also have, as Karen said, the governor appoints a single point of contact, and this isn't just a random action. This is in the legislation. The governor will make the decision for every state on what the state does relative to the FirstNet network. The single point of contact roles are critically important in this process, and they help organize activity for the state and are very important. And if you don't know who your single point of contact is, but you do, please make sure that people in public safety know who your single point of contact is. This is a really critical position, and they help organize town halls, they organize consultations, which we'll talk about, and it's really important that everybody understand who the single point of contact is. And I'm sure Karen is accessible. You can reach her if you have any questions, if you have input. She really does want to hear from you. So there'll be a quiz later. So we'll be asking if you know who your single point of contact is. And in every meeting we go to, we make sure we even hand out lists of who the folks are. FirstNet actually spends quite a bit of time with this team, and I think these guys can attest to it. We have conference calls with them. I mean, we're available to them. We're here to serve them and help them do their job. And we have quite a bit of interaction. You can ask Steve and George about that, when we get to that. We also have the Public Safety Advisory Council. You guys know what that is? You can say no. No? Okay. Public Safety Advisory Council is a group of 40 people that's actually an advisory council to FirstNet. It's chaired by Harlan McEwen. Harlan is from law enforcement, and he's the chair. And then really every public safety agency, there's 40 members of that group, and they represent all of you as advisors to FirstNet. We meet with them frequently about what we're doing. We get input from them. They're working on projects for us, and let me just tell you a really important project that they're working on right now, because I'm going to want your input on this. When we enable the technology to give you access to the network, you're going to have, this is a dedicated network, but let's just say there's an incident, and let's just say the network becomes congested. Does your network become congested when you have an incident today, right? When Verizon network gets, and you can't make a call. In our technology, we have something called priority and preemption, which is the first time that technologically this is capable, where we can actually take users that are on the network who are not as important, obviously, as public safety, get them off the network, and allow people from your agencies to be on the network. The thing that public safety is going to have to do is figure out how to do that locally. And it's not going to be just fire. It's not going to be just law enforcement. It's not going to be just EMT. All these agencies together are going to have to figure out what we call local control, and you're going to have to make decisions about who to give access if there's an issue around capacity. So the group of the Public Safety Advisory Council, we've given them this work to work within all the different agencies to see how we can approach this, because I think it's going to be very different. I mean, how do you decide on things today? I mean, I'm very interested. How do you make decisions around who gets what? Anybody want to answer that? There's a microphone if you want to. Just tell me it, because it'll educate me a little bit. Do you have to make any decisions about that? Is it ever an issue? Like access to the system. I mean, do you ever have problems with congestion on the system and you have to worry about, where people can't use it because everybody's on it? So you have those issues today. Okay, so how do you decide who gets to use it? Like who gives you the most money, or?
Well,
no?
in our area, you don't have a choice. The system's either you get into it or you don't get into it.
So it's pure luck.
Yeah.
It's pure luck. So if you happen to be accessing it and you get on, that's great.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Yes, back there.
So there's also, we have the capability for the GETS card. So a lot of us have GETS cards in the community. That's okay. Government and emergency telecommunication cards, where, of course, that works only with a landline. So you would be able to have priority with that as well as wireless service. Mm-hmm. So, but with wireless, you have to have a contract, and the state does have a contract with wireless priority service, but a lot of entities don't because there is a monthly charge.
Sounds complicated. Is it complicated? Okay, I thought so. I mean, anytime it's like a card, it sounds like, ooh, how do you use that? Because you don't use it very frequently, right? Go ahead. Here. Here's mine.
I was going to say that your problem in rural areas is not congestion, but it's more coverage, okay? So there's few people accessing the system, but there's not enough system to go to,
Perfect, we have an answer for you. Good. But I just want you to know that, your colleagues who are in big cities have congestion problems a lot. So this is going to be a bigger issue, and when some of you go to big cities to work, you'll be happy to know that there's going to be a way that public safety has priority for getting on the network. So I think that's really, really important. But the work that the Public Safety Advisory Council is doing for us is critically important. There are advisors, and if you don't, do we have a list of the PSAC with us today? It might be useful to share with, I think it'd be interesting for people to find out who's on that, because that's another avenue for you to provide input around things that are important to you, because they represent you. So anyway, we meet with them on a fairly frequent basis and get their input. Let me move on to the next item. So let me talk about why this network's different, because people say, well, what's really different about this network? And I think it's really important to know that this is, first, a broadband network. This is a data network. You'll be keeping your LMR for a period of time because this technology does not have mission-critical voice available today. So this will be a data network, and your LMR will be around for a period of time until mission-critical voice is available on this technology. But this is dedicated to public safety. So today, when you use a wireless network from somebody else, you're not necessarily the first priority. Now, maybe you don't have that much of an issue here in rural because you don't have congestion on the commercial wireless network, but I will tell you in the big cities, it's a big deal. I mean, when there's an incident in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, everyone is on the phone. They're texting, they're calling, and public safety cannot get through. So having a dedicated network to public safety is really, really important. This is your network. And it's nationwide. I mean, when we're talking about, as you know, commercial focuses on commercial. And where there's customers, they want to build it so they can get revenue. This is a nationwide network, and it's designed for both urban and rural. So how we deploy that will be dependent upon the feedback we get from the vendors that are going to tell us how we can do that. But the intention is for you to have coverage in the rural area as well as. Now, how we do that may not be terrestrial. It may be a different methodology. But you will have the ability to actually have communications in the rural area. When we do your state consultation, and maybe Karen will talk about that a little bit, we want to understand what your needs are in the state of California. Where are the important things? Where do incidents occur? What are the events that create problems with your network? And that's what we're doing, by the way, in states today. In fact, the FirstNet team is in Kentucky today. It's number 12 of our state consultations. And California, I think, recently just got their consultation package in. Karen is happy to tell me this morning that the package is in. So we'll be scheduling time to do the state consultation for California coming up real soon. But I think it's really important to understand urban is as much of a focus as rural. It's not a secondary focus. It's on the same track, and we're thinking about a complete network here, which I think is really important for people like yourself. It's ruggedized to meet public safety needs. As you know, the commercial networks fail under different weather conditions, under earthquakes, under tornadoes, hurricanes, all those kinds of things. And actually, that's another project that we're working with the Public Safety Advisory Council on, and that is, what are the standards for ruggedization? Because there are no standards today. What does it mean to ruggedize a cell site? Geographically, what we do in California may be different than what we do in New Jersey. We may do different in New Orleans. I mean, obviously, around the nation, everybody has different circumstances, so those conditions will be different. But we're working to understand what that means so that there's a higher probability that that network will stay up under stressful conditions, unlike the commercial networks today. Because commercial networks, as you know, fail under those conditions. And we're also looking at providing access to databases and applications. So I'm sure how many of you have iPhones? How many of you use iPhones in your work? It's okay, you can admit it. This is like an AA program or something. It's okay. And we think it's a real travesty that consumers have more power to do things than public safety. And so what we want to do is think about what are the applications that would be available to you, particularly at the working level, you know, that make it really easy for you to do your job. So a lot of work still to be done in that area, but I just want you to know conceptually we think that's very important. Now, this topic of databases to me is a really interesting one because nobody wants to give access to anybody else about their data. Isn't that right? That fair? Yeah, so what's that? I know we have laws. No, we understand we have laws, but I guess from a position of thinking about how much more effective we could be, and I understand we want to be really careful about who we give access to because we want to trust them. We want to make sure that we trust that they protect that data just like the people who own it. So we really want to find a way to see if we can provide more access to the data that exists out there to help you do your job better. Now, I think we're going to have to go slow on this. I think about it like concentric circles. We can probably start with one that's maybe not so scary and start with that and see how people do it. I also think we have to have technology that authenticates you as an individual and not the device. Because what you don't want to have happen is your device gets stolen and he gets access to it because he has your device, because you can't trust him, right? But think about how much better you could do your job if you had more information. I was with some law enforcement folks on the East Coast, and I was talking about, they were looking at real-time crimes, And they were using a lot of information from databases that help them identify the perpetrator, and they can find them, and they were pretty successful. And I asked the guy, I said, well, you have a lot of information, but what would you like to have that would make you do your job, enable you to do your job better? He says, I'd like to have this from the adjacent state because people cross the state line. But again, we have some limitations. So I think as a public safety entity and organization, we need to think about how that can be helpful to each of the other agencies. And I understand the issues about privacy and laws, and we have to consider all of that. But I have to think about if we could aggregate that information. I mean, this is about saving lives and protecting the lives of the people who are public safety. And how can that help each other a little bit better? And this network can actually enable that access to that. Now, I think something that people think we never think about are devices. Because to me, the network is not only the network that carries the call, but devices to me are an extension of the network. What you carry in your hand and put in your vehicles is just as important as what's carrying the call. And so we're spending a lot of time with organizations to make sure that we have a breadth of choices, that the Band 14 capability sits inside a number of devices that you could have access to, and we understand that it's part of the network. And we understand devices are important because you got a lot of devices today. We're talking about the transition from what you have today to the future. How do we make that simple? Maybe we can just, plug and play a little bit. So we're very sensitive about that and really trying to make sure that we're not only thinking about the network, but all of the devices that you have today and how we transition to the new network. So any questions on this? To me, this is the most important thing I can talk about today is what it is and why it's different than what you have today. So anything that comes to mind? Yes, sir.
Aloha. Thank you so much for being here. It's really a major for us to have you visit us and for bringing transparency to the board of FirstNet. I know there's been a sort of rough start there. I just wanted to make sure that it was clear to everybody when you talked about the source of the funds, the $45 billion auction, that those were auctions of lease, to lease spectrum, not to own spectrum. Correct? Is that correct?
You get a license for a period of time from the FCC, and those things get renewed. I think they're 10-year licenses, and you have certain requirements to build out. And yeah, I haven't known anybody to ever really lose too many of those. Yes.
Right.
But yeah, but that's more clear. Yes.
Anyway, just as a legal regulatory distinction.
Okay.
Those are anyway.
Okay.
I don't want to put a
very
fine
good
point on that.
distinction.
I loved your comments about the ruggedized, dedicated network capacity. I think for those of us who work in rural communities, as you heard, a lot of it isn't about prioritization of traffic, it's about availability of basic access.
Exactly.
So we look at things like if you're going to pull a fiber to a fire station in a remote area, could that fiber also serve the school or the library or other community anchors? So in a way, the prioritized use of being a public safety network makes a lot of sense to us. But between disasters, say, could that capacity be shared with a school, with a library? And the flip side of that, of course, is $7 billion is the annual subsidy that goes to schools for broadband under the E-rate program. And so in a way, it might be a great way to leverage FirstNet investments to say, hey, if there's a school that has a fiber, maybe you're not pulling the fiber, maybe the school already did pull the fiber. What you're getting is a dedicated access and priority access to that network. When the disaster comes and that area is lacking other service, the public safety, the FirstNet response can build upon those existing education networks and other publicly supported and invested networks.
So I think let me see if I got your question right, because there was a lot in there. So let me see if I can sort it out. So you're talking about the existing infrastructure and how it can be leveraged, and so that we can benefit from what might already be out there.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And I will tell you that our process is going to be to issue a request for proposal for a comprehensive network solution. And that response will come from a variety of sources. Nice. Those assets may or may not be part of that response. And it doesn't mean that we wouldn't look at that at some future point, but we're going to be looking for people to respond to us to say, this is what we want to do. We don't want to prescribe how we're going to do it, but you come back to us, and it's going to be multiple people. There's not going to be one company that's going to be able to answer this comprehensive RFP for FirstNet. And it's their response that will determine the use of those assets, or at some future point, let's assume that we award the contract to that consortium of partners that we will have. You may come back to us afterwards and say, I understand where you're going to provide coverage because we'll be providing a plan to your governor in the state of California, and that plan will describe the coverage and the cost once we get the RFP. And you may look at that and say, that's great, but I'd like to improve X, Y, and Z. I'd like to improve coverage over here. You may come back. Speaking of public safety, you know what? I got. Well, how appropriate. Now that's real. What's that?
I think I will end there.
I'm really sorry that I brought those things on. Oh, that's why we need a public safety network, right? Ooh, okay. Is everybody okay? Everyone okay? Yeah, I know, a little aftershock,
Hey, Sue.
Yes.
It's Carl, right behind you. I just noticed that after that, everybody grabbed their cell phones.
I know, and that's what happens. Everybody's calling and texting, right? What's that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, try using it. Does it work? There might be a few people on the network. You know, I have to tell you a funny story. When I worked, pardon me? Oh, okay, good. Well, you know, we know about those things, right? So I worked at Pacific Bell. For a number of years, and one of my jobs was to run one of the business units. And part of that organization was the engineering and operations. Obviously, it was a complete business unit. We would do emergency operations center tests, and we would go in and we would simulate a situation like an earthquake. And we were actually in one day, and we actually had an actual earthquake. So I'm going to have to tell people that it seems like every time I talk about this, I tend to bring it on. I'm really sorry about that. Anyway, back to your issue. So I hope I'm being really clear that we're interested in that. But in terms of using those assets, it will be determined by the folks who are responding to that as to how we could use those. And it may be something that we do after the initial award to see how to leverage. Now, I also want to be clear about the users of the network. As you may know, that we issued a public notice and comment, and that was issued last year because we needed to clarify some of the parts of the legislation. Not surprising, the legislation was not clear in all areas. So we needed to go out, and one of the definitions is the definition of a public safety entity. And so part of that is who can be users of the network, and what does that mean? But I think what's important for you to understand is with the capacity you have in your network, I don't think needing to limit is going to be an issue. I think it's going to be more of an issue for you locally. I mean, you might not have it as much here, but in the big cities, I think they'll have an issue, is who are the people who can have access to that network. Now, when we lease it for excess capacity, whoever leases it can determine who can be using it. So I don't know what the answer to that's going to be, but part of it is who can be on the primary and who can be on the lease. Does that help a little bit? Do you think, have I been responsive to your question? Okay, great. Any other questions about this? Got your attention, didn't I? I'm telling you, those great communications people. Let's make sure we have an earthquake when that happens. Okay, let me talk about culture. I come from a long history of providing service. Having worked at Pacific Bell, just sort of my nature is customers are really important to me. You are all the customers of this network. We've had, I think, some people concerned, if you think about FirstNet's situation in terms of we sit inside the federal government, inside the Department of Commerce, inside of NTIA, National Telecommunications Information Administration, thank you. See, those acronyms get me every time. Anyway, so people think we're the feds, right? So, and people aren't really excited sometimes about having the feds involved in things. I just want you to know that what we're trying to do is create an organization that is extremely, extremely focused on serving the people it's serving. And that means 24/7. That means being immediately responsive. Don't you guys work 24/7? I mean, do you ever take any time off? No, I didn't think so. Okay. So we think we need to be 24/7 in order to provide service to you. And I'll just give you a little example. So at Christmas time, we have a staff of about 100 people now. Some people in Colorado, a lot of people in Washington. And one of the things that annoys me more than anything, just to know what some of my pet peeves are, is to get an email from somebody during the holidays that says, I'm on vacation until January 9th, period. So who am I supposed to call if I can't reach you? Who's your alternative? Who do I call? And so the executive director and I discussed that and said, for FirstNet, I want to make sure that every person has the name and number of somebody they can call if they need help, and I want somebody on duty all the time. And I'm pleased to tell you that I think there were some folks in the public safety area who were trying to get something done. They were actually able to get it done, and they were actually quite pleased about it. I know that seems like a minor thing, but I think it's a cultural thing. And I just want you to know from the very beginning, we're trying to create an organization that has that kind of attitude and mentality, because we think in order to serve you, we have to be 24/7. So I just want you to know that that's really, really important. And I'd appreciate any comments on that. Do you think we're doing the right thing? Yes? Okay. Okay, well, tell me if we're not, because, you know, it's your network. Okay, let me, let's see, turn this around. See, I went back. So let me just go forward. And I think I'm almost finished here. So let me talk about the path we're on. In the early days, and I think you said it, we had a rough start. The gentleman in the back, you said we had kind of a rough start. We did. And I was at a meeting about a year and a half ago, and I said, yeah, we did, and we've corrected those things, and we're on a good path now. Back in March of 2014, we issued what we call a strategic roadmap. Simply, it just says what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, and what you should expect. So you, as the recipients of this, know, and by the way, when they did this graphic, I said, I hope that doesn't mean we're meandering. They just said, we just couldn't fit it all. We just couldn't fit it all on a straight line. So I just want you to know it doesn't mean we're meandering. But what that said was we want to tell you what we're doing by when, so you can know when to expect plans to your governor. Because obviously the goal here is to get this network built as quickly as possible. But I will tell you that we have some very specific things that we have to go through because of the legislation, that steps that we have to take to get to putting that, for deploying that network. One of the things we did, and I told you about the public notice and comment, is to clarify the legislation. Very important, because some of it's vague language in the legislation. We also issued a draft request for information from the vendor community, because we wanted to start to get information from the vendor community about how they were thinking about this network. Very successful. We got a lot of responses from that. Now, we'll tell you our next step is we're going to be issuing a draft request for proposal at the end of March. So and I'll just be candid with you. People are shocked that we're actually doing what we said we were going to do. I guess that's kind of unique for these kinds of programs. But we take it very seriously. So that draft RFP is coming out at the end of March. And the important step, I keep mentioning consultation. Consultation is a really important part of that draft RFP. What you're going to do with Karen and her team and the FirstNet team is going to instruct us on some things that we have to think about as far as the RFP is concerned. So getting that draft RFP is important. The RFP that we issue will determine the state plans, because everybody wants to know when are we going to do this and how much is it going to cost. So we need to actually get the feedback from the RFP, from the vendors, on how to do this before we can come back to your state and say, this is what we plan to do. This is the coverage we're going to plan for you, and this is how much it will cost users of this network. Until we have the response from the vendors, I can't tell you today how much it's going to cost you. But let me just tell you that this RFP is so important to get the value from that excess capacity. The goal here is to make this as economic and as attractive to you as possible, because there's no obligation for you to sign up. You don't have to sign up, even though the governor may decide to opt in and us provide the network. we have to provide something to you that you find valuable and at a price that you think is worth paying for what we're giving you. So we understand that, and I know everybody wants to know when and how much, and I wish I could tell you today, but I have to go through a few steps in order to get that done. So I think it's really important to understand that. As I said, the RFP leads to the state plans. State plans lead to the state decision. The decision is made by the governor of every state, not by the cities, by the governor. Karen is the single point of contact for the governor of the state of California. She will be very involved in this process, and you can ask her any questions because she's more familiar with that process and the politics of the state of California than I am. I have to think about all 56 states and territories. And then the state decision, if we gave a plan to the governor of California, he or she, whoever it is, I don't know, hopefully we'll do it soon enough that it'll still be he, they can make a decision that day. I mean, I think we're going to work so collaboratively along the process that it shouldn't be a surprise. When they get it, we will have worked so closely with them. They could decide that day, we're in, let's move forward. Or a state could say, you know what, this is really interesting, but we'd like to build our own radio access network, which a state has the option to do. They then need to make that decision, take it back to the FCC, get approval for that, and then potentially get funding from the federal government to build their own radio access network. Some states are thinking about that, and the legislation allows for that to happen. So it's a little bit of work to get done, but again, if you decide to opt in, this network could be deployed pretty quickly. So any questions on that? This is our roadmap. This is what we're going to do. And yes, ma'am.
I just have a real quick question, just
Yes.
a point of clarification. You said radio access network,
Correct.
not a broadband network.
Well, I only refer to the RAN because that's the actual cell sites, the radio access network. So I appreciate the question because FirstNet will manage the core.
Right.
The states do not manage the core, which is the brains, it's where the subscriber information, it's where all the decisions get made. But the actual cell sites, the state can actually opt out and build their own radio access network, which would be broadband, because they would have to build that network in conformance with the network policies and requirements, because they still will be interoperable with every other network. So you can't just build whatever you want.
Right.
It has to meet some certain requirements.
I just wanted to clarify
Yes.
that because in some cases, we're planning a new RAN in
Right.
our local area. And we're
Right.
doing it because, in my case, our system is 50 years old, except what we've had to replace.
Correct.
So it's a very old network that needs to be upgraded, and we just want to be sure that we're investing money in something that's going to
That
last.
makes sense, right. Right. Well, I think that would be a great topic to discuss with your single point of contact. I think Karen's taking good note of that, and I think it'd be really important for you guys to have a conversation about your plans and how that all fits in. So that's great. Anything else? Everybody get that? Let me just tell you, we're on track. We're delivering what we said. To me, that's the only thing that matters. You got to do what you say. I mean, it's nothing more complicated than that. Let me just start. I think this is where I finish, and this is really about state consultations. We started consultations last year. We're on an even dozen today in Kentucky. So we're in Kentucky today having a state consultation. The map is such that the dark blue are the ones we've already done. So you can see the dark blue are the states we've done. The light blue are the ones that the checklist has been returned to FirstNet. I don't think the other color came through. I think the other ones are pending. But we have another, I think, 11 scheduled so far, but we're waiting for other plans. And like I said, California just sent theirs in, so you'll have a different color on there because we'll be scheduling your meeting. These are really, really important. So if you have questions about the state consultation, Karen is the person to talk to, because she will work collaboratively amongst the state to determine who attends those meetings, and it's really important that public safety be at those meetings. We need to hear from you at those meetings and hear what's on your mind, what you're looking for, what's important. Like I said, where your incidents occur, where your coverage issues are, and there will be several consultations that occur before we finish, but that meeting is really important, and I think they've been very productive. We have a website. If you want to see what's going on with FirstNet, there's this website called FirstNet.gov. And you can go on there, you can see a blog that we have, you can see the state consultations, you can see what's required at the state consultation. We put on that website all the information from our board meetings. I think it's a great resource for all of you if you want to find out additional information. But state consultations are a critical part of this. Essentially what we're focused on, very frankly, you guys, is state consultation and the RFP. Those are our two big priorities, and that's what's going to get you your network built on the schedule that we've identified. What questions do you have? Was that helpful, you guys? Trying to keep it simple. It's a very complicated process. It's one of the most complicated things I've ever been involved in. Yes, sir.
Hi. I just wanted to confirm that the RFP is a statewide RFP.
The statewide, no, it's not a statewide, it's a nationwide RFP.
No, I mean the one that's going to build our California network?
The RFP is a nationwide RFP which would take into consideration what the needs are in California.
Okay, so what we need to do is get with Karen and tell her what we need for our area.
Right.
Before they send the RFP out.
So that we understand your requirements are actually, make sure that they're incorporated into the total RFP. Now, I think your requirements, a lot of your requirements will be very similar to other states in a lot of areas. But you may have some unique things that we need to make sure that we take into consideration. It is a nationwide RFP. Nationwide. Yes, sir. I think that's it. We'll be around for the rest of the afternoon, so if you come up with other questions, I'm happy to. Delighted to be here. Thank you for your attention, and glad I could get your attention through the earthquake. That's great.
Okay, our next presenter is, now I forgot, Mike Boyden? Mike Boyden with SAIC, and Mike will be going through a little bit more detail on the state process. We will have a panel here soon also to talk more about the state consultation. So if you have some more questions, jot them down, because as Sue was saying, that is going to be critical to make sure your needs are met as this network is designed.
Thanks, Karen. Let's see if I can get this on here. Everybody hear me okay? First thing I want to know is who's got a device, who knows what the magnitude of that earthquake was in the epicenter? What do we got? 5.6. 5.6 in epicenter? 5. Oh, okay. 30 miles. Any major damage? Or because I assume you're still here. It's not next door. Okay, really good. Thank you. 25. Okay, there we go. Yes, this has been an exciting day for me. My name is Mike Boyden. I'm with Science Applications International. As Karen mentioned, we're supporting as consultant to the Office of Emergency Services here in California to help educate and inform with respect to FirstNet. So far, I say it's an interesting day because it woke up as glorious sunshine. It was a beautiful morning, and then we immediately saw the fire in Fortuna, and that was pretty dramatic. We were there just as they had the, they were tearing apart the building, and they were still streaming all sorts of water over things. And now we got the earthquake. I'm really not sure what's going to happen next. Are we in this is in a tsunami zone? Is it right here? Okay. That's farther down. All right. Well, what we'll do now is I want to thank Sue very much for the overview that she provided. I hope folks realize how fortunate they are. She's the chairwoman of the board for FirstNet at a national level, and this is the first time we've ever had her in California, I think, speaking for a town hall. And so just really appreciate the extra effort that she did to come out and meet with us here. What I'll be doing is I'm going to take this down a little bit, focus it a little bit more, and be actually adding another layer of detail to some of the questions that you asked, because I'll be focusing on the state level. What I'll do is I'll first reiterate the vision. You always got to have the vision when you have something that's as long and as important as this. Then what I'll do is talk about how we're going to be structured and are structured in California with respect to getting this done. And some of the questions like, gee, we got to get our inputs for an RFP that's going to really determine our future. We'll talk about how you do that in terms of a governance and a structure to make that happen. We'll talk about further, more detail, the next steps, what's going to be happening next, kind of leading off what Sue had provided, and then take a quick step back and talk about what's happening right now in the state with respect to LA County. We're actually deploying public safety broadband wireless service now in that county, so we can talk about that. So with that, let me do the vision here. Let's try that again. There we go. What's happening here, Paul? There we go. The vision: to provide emergency responders with the first nationwide high-speed wireless broadband network dedicated to public safety. Kind of says that all in that one statement, but I want to unpack it a little bit starting from the back. And Sue's mentioned some of this. First, the dedicated part. Today, if you're a public safety professional and you're using data, now again, this is separate from your land mobile radio, your push-to-talk mission-critical voice. We're talking data here. If you're using it, you're probably using a commercial service, something from AT&T or Verizon, something that's the same sort of service that your teenagers are using and you're using on your iPhone or your Android smartphone, or the families and kids and neighbors down your street. That works generally day to day wonderfully. There's enough capacity. As some folks mentioned, it's not an issue of capacity, it's more an issue of coverage, particularly in rural areas. And so that's not a problem. Where the problem is, and this again has a lot to do in more urban areas, is when something happens. And when you have something happen, everybody, just as you saw, it was a great demonstration of the earthquake, gets on their cell phones, going to start tweeting, going to start sending video clips if they're, again, in a coverage area such as that. And what happens here is so does public safety. And so you immediately flood a cell sector. This has happened over and over again, whether the earthquake was here or was in DC, whether it was a mudslide in Washington. Immediately you're vying for the same resource at the same time, and nobody gets anything, as was pointed out. Now, that's an issue that having a dedicated network for public safety eliminates. It's something we don't have today that we will have with FirstNet. And it doesn't have to be bad things. Being Super Bowl coming up next week, this is a thing that happened out in the fall, an article, and it says, the city of Seattle asked people to stop streaming videos, posting photos because of football. And what they really mean is, within the article, here's the Jeff Redding, the communications director for the mayor. He says, we wanted to remind people that it may be better to wait to share your photos, stream videos, and other non-essential mobile conversation to ensure that emergency phone calls on cell phones can get through. Today, you have to ask people to behave in order to make public safety work. That's something that's just not viable in the future. The next thing we want to talk about is, let's go back in that statement and talk about what wireless broadband is all about. This whole question of why do we need broadband. Now broadband, again, we're talking data, so what we're talking about is a high throughput. Well, what's happening, and again, particularly this is in more urban areas where there's a lot of usage, is we're doing it ourselves. Yet we're high capacity cellular services provided today, wireless cellular for public safety, there's been a literal explosion in terms of the amount of data. And it's happening, well, just for example, let's take urban law enforcement, for example. There's technology right now there that pushes audio data. We're talking shot spotter technology where it listens for gunfire. When it hears those, it triangulates and then directs the first responder for aid. Going up a little bit higher, talk about license plate readers. There was an article actually in the Wall Street Journal here on Monday about all the things that they're doing with license plate reading information, but those are images that we're taking there. More bandwidth that's required, that's data, it's not voice. Going up that thing one more time, video. There's video that's being used in urban areas right now and also local ones that are not only coming from our law enforcement personnel themselves, but also they're making use of like residents or industrial videos. Helps them fight crime. That video is actually not only coming from those stationary areas, You're hearing a lot more these days, particularly like with the incidents like in Ferguson and such about body cameras. In the Bay Area where I'm from, right now they're requiring the officers on the beat to be wearing a body camera. And what they found is studies have said that up to 60% of reduction in the use of excessive force has been found through the use of body cameras. But it works in the reverse too. What other studies have found is that people behave better when they know they're being recorded. You know, smile, you're on camera. So controversial still, but not going away by any means. And then finally, there's the video and information that's data that's coming from the local public at large. Just for example, you witness a crime in progress, you got a video clip of it, want to get it to your local law enforcement official, there's an app for that. And so there's just all this sort of information that's becoming more and more available and therefore useful if it's timely and if it's funneled to our field forces. This is part of a bigger trend. Like I say, it's uneven in its implementation, and you see it more in urban than you see it in rural, but it's all coming. If you look at the overall trend, what's happened is, for example, in 2013, Americans have spent 2.6 trillion minutes talking on their cell phones. And that's up to 17% from 2010. Okay, so 17% increase in cell phones. Data usage, meanwhile, is up 732%, from 388 billion megabytes in 2010 to 3.23 trillion megabytes in 2013. That's a lot of bytes moving around. And if you want to know what are they doing, it's really changed over the last few years too. Right now, the most recent study says that 35% of all internet traffic is Netflix. And 14% is YouTube. So nearly half the traffic that's right now on the commercial internet is video. You can imagine those same sorts of things will happen once something like FirstNet's available. How's FirstNet going to handle that? Well, you heard from Sue. They've been given $7 billion to build this network. They've been given the 20 megahertz of spectrum, so that's space of bandwidth at the 700 megahertz frequency level. And again, that she mentions it's beachfront property. It really is. It's surprising that they provide it for law enforcement. Her deputy chief, Jeff Johnson, on the board, likes to call it the linebacker of spectrum. And it's for good reason. It's the propagation penetration capabilities. If they had given law enforcement, fire service, emergency medical, public safety, say frequencies at like 2.4 gigahertz, like where Sprint is right now, you'd need 13 to 15 more cell sites being built to provide the same coverage as a single cell site at the 700 megahertz range. So it's very, very valuable stuff. The third thing that the Act has done, which is kind of unusual from my perspective in terms of regulation and policy, is it specified a technology. The law specifies that that FirstNet deploy LTE, the fourth generation long-term evolution technology that you hear in all the commercials from the Verizon and the other carriers. And this is an international standard, and it's basically going, if you're going from a 3G to a 4G network, we've got some US cellular folks here, they're familiar with this. It's like going from a garden hose to a fire hose in terms of bandwidth. It literally makes possible what isn't possible, such as the one-way, two-way video, high-definition video. That's available on a 4G broadband network. And so that's what FirstNet's goal is to provide to public safety. Now there's some challenges to that. What you got today is, if you're working on a land mobile radio system, what you want to do to install a cell site is you want to find a really high spot, say a mountaintop, put a really tall antenna, and then you can broadcast 20, 40 miles and have relatively high power equipment too, 5 to maybe all the way up to 100 watt gear. LTE doesn't work that way. LTE is cellular technology, so by definition it's small. The sites are 1 to 5, I think he's leaning on the lights, that's why. It's not an earthquake. They're 1 to 5 mile in radius. And the cell, because of that, the equipment is like only a quarter watt, much smaller. But what you can see, though, just by this diagram, is it's going to take a lot more of them. And so now you got to imagine the challenge of FirstNet, which is all 50 states, The 5 territories from here to Guam and back, and Washington, D.C., covering that for public safety. It's not an easy thing. So they've gotten creative about it. Let's see here. Oh, no, that's good. Okay. Focusing on California, what their obligation is like I say, they need to cover where public safety folks do their job. If you're a commercial network, as Sue had mentioned, you build your network where the people are who are going to pay for your service. FirstNet has to build where the incidents occur and where public safety does their job. So for California, you know, it's been the hottest year on record in the world last year. It's going to be all over areas where there's wildfires that aren't necessarily in populated areas. It's going to be, this is far more appropriate than I ever imagined, earthquakes. They happen with respect to, regardless of the boundaries or regions, or whether you're in urban, rural, or suburban environments. But even, I wouldn't say as more important, but at least as important, critical infrastructure. Public safety has a lot of critical infrastructure that isn't necessarily associated with population centers. Many are, you know, like fire stations and things like that, but there's also, and 911 centers, but there's also critical infrastructures like dams or pipelines or one of these, it's hard to read on this thing, but hazardous material routes where you're routing things in transit. All those areas need to have public safety coverage in order for you to do your job. So it becomes a real challenge because these aren't natural places where you'd build things. FirstNet's approach, therefore, is to do something that's going to end up being a bit of a blend. If you're looking at this slide from the right, if you're in an urban area and there's an opportunity for leveraging existing infrastructure and things like that, there will be an LTE network available, that broadband that we just talked about. As you move out into areas that are more rural, all the way out, you know, headed towards wilderness, so to speak, you're going to be using other technologies. You may be using what they call boomer sites. You're going to take the LTE cellular site, but you're going to treat it like a land mobile radio, put it up higher, put it at higher power so it goes larger range. You're going to maybe use satellite technology if you're not totally covered by foliage. And finally, you're going to maybe bring the network with you. And I think that you will see a lot of that in the rural areas. That's deployable, cell-on-wheel types of technology. Again, this is cellular technology, so it's just like that. You're bringing that cellular antenna with you to fight the fire or respond to the incident. Just as an example, in the state of New Jersey, they received some grant funding. I'll tell you about what's happening in LA with theirs, but with New Jersey, they bought 30 deployables, so they're going to test how that works. And that's going to be a useful kind of living lab for us as we look at how to address some of California's more rural areas. That's in New Jersey. Let's see. So that's a little bit of an introduction to what we're doing with FirstNet. I want to talk a little bit about how we're going to structure ourselves in California. The pictures are the people that Sue mentioned. There's the FirstNet board at the federal level, and she's in the center there. That's what governs that FirstNet entity, this basically non-for-profit wireless cellular communications company, data company in the Department of Commerce. At the state level, we have an equivalent. What's been established is the California First Responder Network Board, or CalFIRN. These are those representatives that are going to funnel that information that you need to get to them for the RFP. It's managed or governed by or led by the Office of Emergency Services, Cal OES, which is Karen, and she's our single point of contact. Come on. On that board are a microcosm of public safety. You've got your badges, hoses, and bandages, plus more. So in addition to the police, fire, emergency medical, you also have special stakeholders with special interests or special needs. For example, as you roll down that list on the bottom, tribal. We've got sovereign nations within California. In fact, there's 109 of them, and Carl will talk more about that. Cynthia Gomez out of the governor's office is part of this board. Now, what will happen is there's the board, and then what's been established is advisory committees to the board. Right now, there's ones that you're familiar with, like the 911 Advisory Board or CalCIC, the Interoperable Executive Committee. Those are advising to the board, just like you heard about the Peace Act that advises the federal board. So it's very much an analogy. But you also have some new advisory committees that were just established this last summer. For example, the Tribal Advisory Committee as well as the Technical Committee. Technical Advisory Committee was actually instrumental in us as California responding to the RFI that Sue had mentioned was released in the fall. Now, how does this all work together? Well, you got FirstNet, you've got the single point of contact in California, you've got the board for California, CalFIRN, and you got us. Now, what will happen is information will flow from FirstNet, as you're getting it right now here in this outreach session, though, through this single point of contact from the board and then to stakeholders. But as important, and probably more so, is your feedback flows that same way. So it's good not only to know Karen, but it's also good to know the representative that fits best with your organization that's on the board. Okay, let's talk about we'll kind of wrap up here and talk about what's going to be happening next. What's been happening is over the past year, we've been doing these sorts of town hall sessions, and we've got all sorts of materials because we really want to, that are available that we really want you to take advantage of. There's a lot on the table here. The folks that you see supporting this meeting, contact them because it's important to get people to know what this is. This act was established in 2012. We're in 2015, and there's a lot of folks that still have not heard about it or haven't made it real yet. And the understanding, I'll talk more about this later, is critical in order to get what we need for it to be useful here in California. We've been doing, last year we did a couple of workshops sponsored by the Office of Emergency Communications out of the Department of Homeland Security, kind of prequels to what's going to happen with consultations. We just got our consultation checklist out to FirstNet this month, and that'll open the door for us getting that scheduled in this year. Okay, this is how it's going to kind of lay out if you're looking at the state and the federal things happening in parallel. Sue's team, the FirstNet organization, is going to be building that RFP. As she mentioned, that's her main goal in addition to consultation, and getting that out to suppliers that can bid on it. They're going to get information on what needs to be in there from the stakeholder inputs for the folks that are on the bottom there that have been provided outreach so they understand what it is and then provide their input, for example, through the PSAC. Now for us in the middle, here in the state, there was that workshops I mentioned that happened last year, the outreach that we're talking about right now, and the idea here is to get people knowledgeable because we'll be coming back with another round of asking about your coverage needs. Someone had asked, well, you know, what do we need to get and who to get it to? Well, what will be happening is FirstNet will be providing us, there'll be either templates or an online tool or spreadsheets to be able to get the coverage information in terms of data collection as part of that network design. I'll talk more about that here. I'll talk more about it right now. What's happening here is you see this loop. All of a sudden this ties in from the what's happening in the RFP to what's happening here at the state level. And that's the input of that design. There's going to be multiple consultations. By law, FirstNet is required to consult with the states in developing the network design for the state. And so the way that's going to happen is they're going to get input from us. They'll go work on the design. They'll come back and they'll provide a draft design. We'll tell them what's wrong with it, what's missing. We'll say, hey, we have coverage here, but we really need it over here. There's this thing that happens once a year. I mean, think about it. We got George Molnar here from Nevada. If you weren't, at least a few years ago, if you weren't local and knowledgeable, you would have no idea that once a year in August, 70,000 people appear and become a community in the middle of the desert in La Playa and be Burning Man Festival and then disappear. But that still requires public safety knowledge. And so we have all sorts of events just like that. You know, the Rose Bowl, you can go off and mention any and all of the different things that are happening in California. Those all get integrated. You get a final design that becomes the state plan that then is presented to the governor, and then it gets deployed. Now, why are we talking so much about this? The reason is this is very different, very, very different than what we typically do. If you're working with the feds on building a land mobile radio network, as Sue had mentioned, you typically are requesting a grant, they give you grant funds, you build what you need. Not so with FirstNet. As she mentioned, FirstNet gets the money from the spectrum auctions, keeps the money, asks you what you need, and then builds that and charges you a recurring fee. So what happens is your focus shifts from make sure I get enough money to make sure I've communicated and articulated where I need this coverage in order for it to be useful when it comes to the end of the day and it's available. All right, let's talk about something that's happening right now. What we have is the Los Angeles Regional Interoperable Communications System Joint Powers Authority, or LA-RICS. What this is this association of 81 public safety agencies making up 34,000 first responders. Just to put that in context, this is a highly urban, dense population. Steve Noel's here from Oregon. Oregon has, in the whole state, about 20,000 first responders. So this is a big area, a lot of support. They're going to be building up close to 200 site LTE network in parallel with their upgrade to P25 for the land mobile radio network. Definitely a challenge. We're talking 4,000 square miles, and even more so a challenge is the timing. They got their grant funds before FirstNet, before 2012, and so it's 5 years and that federal money is expiring August. And so they basically have to build this between now and then. So far, in December, they broke ground on 5 sites, got slated to break ground 35 sites this month. They'll do 35 to 45 about in the following months. And they've already got about 135 signed site access agreements. So they're ready to go. They're going as fast as they can, but it's going to be a real challenge. But when this is built, this is a $175 million effort. It's going to be the largest public safety broadband network in the US until FirstNet's substantially deployed. So this is a prime opportunity for us because this is going to be our lab, our chance for lessons learned to understand what works and doesn't work in LA, and then as it rolls out to the state at large, we can take advantage of that information. Mm-hmm.
Will there be any requirement for interoperability between the system they're putting together and what FirstNet will be? I mean, it seems like they're way ahead of where FirstNet's going, not having all the backbone and infrastructure set up yet. So without knowing what kind of services and layout you're going to do, how will that roll into what we're trying to do?
Okay, yeah, so the question is, how will they interact with FirstNet? Will they interoperate? Absolutely. Sue can probably provide more detail, but she mentioned that network core, the brains of it's a multi-site redundant computing center, basically, that does all the real-time processing for the entire network structure. That they'll end up migrating to. So at the end of the day, go ahead, Sue.
Yeah, I actually was involved with the LA-RICS project. Well, they were granted money prior to FirstNet's existence, and then it got put on hold for a period of time when FirstNet got created. And basically, they're going to be deploying 700 LTE equipment, so it'll be very compatible. We actually have people from FirstNet working side by side with those folks on a day-to-day basis. So we're trying to get a lot of information from those projects that'll be helpful to the nationwide network. So it's a pretty collaborative project.
Yeah, they're working so close that FirstNet's given them homework. They've given them certain problems that they have to look for in each of these. There's several other sites throughout the U.S., maybe half a dozen, that receive the grant monies in the same manner. And they're allowing them to continue, like I mentioned, New Jersey is one of them, Adams County in Colorado, Harris in Texas. But all of those have been given a kind of their homework to do in terms of learning something about their deployment that can be applied to the nationwide rollout. The question I thought you were going to ask, though, is what about my land mobile radio? And as part of FirstNet's initial service, there will be interoperability to your land mobile network. They're going to use a gateway. And so for people that are in non-mission critical positions, you'll be able to do push-to-talk on your smartphone, your FirstNet smartphone, and be able to communicate with the folks that are out in the field. All right, next steps. What I want to do here is pick up where Sue left off in terms of her road to FirstNet. So she gave you the S-curves going through kind of the 2014 to 16 area, talking about right now we're in outreach and awareness. I mentioned collecting the data that you'll need for designing the network, and we talked about the RFP that's coming up this year. They'll also be the first thing to build is that network core. You've got to have that to be connecting to the radio networks out in the field. What happens next is as those plans get out, the governors make their decisions. And then as they opt in, they'll start building. Now, the thing about this is just a path. This is a transit path to get data from one place to another. What's important is all the integration of your existing data systems. This would be like CAD data if you want to get that out there. Next generation 911 is coming on the heels here. And so in California, it'll be important to integrate that. So, I mean, what's the value of being able to text a picture, a high-resolution picture of a lost child to 911, and then have to verbally describe it to somebody over a radio? You want to be able to push that back out, and FirstNet will allow you, that network, to have that image go out to the field. This act was established in 2012. 10 years later, 2022, is going to be where well, actually, the spectrum auction's a moot point at this point because they've been fully funded. But at this point, this is when the network has to be substantially in operation per the law. And that's important because at this point, any unused funds go back to Treasury that FirstNet hasn't used. The GAO assesses FirstNet's performance. And the FCC decides whether or not to renew that lease. Someone mentioned that these are actually leases. So back in 2012, that seemed like a long time away. Now that we're in 2015 and where we're at, we're just pushing out the RFP, that's not that far away. And so we have to do all that we can in terms of helping this along in a timely fashion. It's something that's really a goalpost that we're going to be driving to. Okay, you can help. How can you help? One is to help manage expectations. We get a lot of folks that are confused, or when they hear about a network and they think public safety, they think of public safety radio. So they think it's your land mobile radio, your push to talk, your mission critical voice. Let those folks know, no, don't wait for FirstNet to replace that, and I don't need to do your line item budget for your radios anymore. No, you're still going to need that for the foreseeable future. What it's going to be is the complementary, again, it's the complementary technology of providing the data that goes with that voice. The other thing is help others get educated about this. Sue had mentioned FirstNet.gov has a great site now. It's got videos in there. It's got one-page fact sheets. We've got infographics and posters, you name it, over on this table. These town halls are being recorded and will actually be on YouTube. You can look at the ones that have been in other areas. They're already posted. There's sites like Oregon that has, we helped them build a website, has similar things. There are video clips, there's articles, the opportunity to get yourself educated and then pass that on to other folks. With that, what questions do you have? All right.
Okay, the next we're going to have a panel discussion on the state consultation process. And we just now, truly, this week, Sue? This week, got our state consultation package to FirstNet. We were not one of the first. We were probably on the latter end of the middle. And the reason why ours took a while is because this state is so big and so complex. We wanted to make sure that we could put enough information in there so FirstNet would be prepared for the state consultations, and they've agreed for 3 because of the population in California and the challenges that we have throughout the state bringing FirstNet. So we will have 3, and we will want a lot of our public safety partners in those meetings. Again, this is your network. FirstNet needs to hear from you on the challenges, who should be a public safety user, who the entities are, who do we rely on in the rural areas as far as secondary responders. I think the volunteer fire department, which was in action this morning, would be one that you would want at least to acknowledge for FirstNet, because a lot of the rural areas we're finding out rely on a volunteer fire department. So it's not what we would see in Sacramento or in Los Angeles or in the Bay Area. So there are different challenges, and those types of issues need to be brought forth. So as we look at this, we're preparing for our state consultations. We have identified around 600 people that have already let us know that they would like to be part of the consultation. We would like all of you to let us know as well. I know that 600 people won't show up. People have different schedules. But what I want to do is make sure that we have enough folks there to speak up and to say what the needs are. I was fortunate enough to go to both Nevada and Oregon state consultation process. I want to learn as much as I can before we do this in California. I'll be going to Texas state consultation in a couple of weeks. I talk a lot with Texas. Texas, well, it's Texas, but it's different than us. But then at the same time, it has a lot of similarities. The size, the population, the rural areas, we have so many similarities. I truly believe I can learn a lot to bring back to California to make sure when FirstNet comes for the state consultation meetings, we're able to provide as much information as possible to get this network to do what we need it to do. The other thing we're doing, and I apologize for not having it here, but staff keep telling me I'm asking a little bit too much, and I probably am, is we're mapping all of our 911 calls for the last year on a map. And the reason why we're doing that is we have emergencies every day in California. It could be an accident on one of the freeways. It could be a rural fire. It could be an earthquake. And the only way that we can show truly the number of 911 calls and where our emergency responders go on a daily basis is by mapping our 911. And do we have anyone here from MODOC today? I was hoping we would get somebody from MODOC. I was surprised at the number of 911 calls. We have 1/4 done, the number of 911 calls in MODOC. So they need the same situation awareness for their community as someone needs in the Bay Area. So by mapping this, we can show the differences that we have and the number of 911 calls and responses in the state as another tool to provide FirstNet to show where we're at with the state and where we need this network. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Steve Noel. Oh, did I mess that up? No, you're fine. Okay. Steve.
All right. All right. Hey, thank you. Thanks again, Karen, for the opportunity to be here. And you know, boy, it's a lot like Oregon right here. Nice weather. We're having nice weather up there, minus the earthquake. And I also want to say great job on your selection of consultant to work with your program. I think that's a pretty good choice. We're kind of unique. Oregon and California, we share utilization of SAIC. And so that has helped a lot of great collaboration. So really enjoy that. And we get to learn the best of what each state is doing and try to implement that. One thing I'd say with the consultation process that, you know, that I'm continually learning is that trying to get, you've heard of the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, is really trying to get local champions to help out with FirstNet. And so that's always a work in progress. And so what I've done and our team has done is Portland's our biggest city. And so we have a local champion there that is kind of their FirstNet point of contact. And I'm trying to work with the different communities throughout the state so that we have local champions there. Because when you go to a local law enforcement office or a fire department, you're going to listen more to that local chief than you are to me about what's happening with FirstNet. And so we think that's a big challenge, and it's also provided dividends. My other job is, and Sue mentioned earlier, there's a lot of acronyms in this business, and so the 2 acronyms I have are SWIC and SPOC. And I can do this a little bit for the SPOC, but the SWIC stands for Statewide Interoperability Coordinator. And so that's really, I'm a state employee, but I really work for the locals, and it's to try to provide better communications across the board. And so it fits in pretty good with FirstNet. And George is dual-hatted in the same regard. And really, what we find in this business, you know, with interoperable communications, it's not always the technology. A lot of times it's the people in collaboration. So one of the things we did, and I brought a few of these. There's some over there, but it's a field guide. And this is for the land mobile radio systems. And it basically, all the regions we have in our state, it has the different frequencies that everybody uses. And so it's a great tool if you're going to maneuver around and understand if you're going to go to a different location, what you're going to utilize. And we've also, through the help of SAIC, this information is available in an app that you can get at the iTunes Store or Google Play. It's been very beneficial. Law enforcement folks, fire, and EMS have all used it, and it's been very effective during the wildland fires. And so this is just, one thing that's going to be coming with FirstNet down the road, and the ability to get the apps and the sharing of information. So I thought I'd mention that. And the other unique thing that we found out by going out and visiting with all the local government agencies, we were pretty progressive on this to begin with. We've, I think, had over 175 on-site FirstNet discussions, and some of those are very small, some have been large. I think the largest amount is 400 to 500 people in a room, usually at a conference. But it's been a big benefit, and we find that usually it takes, it's going to take 2 or 3 discussions about FirstNet before people start understanding what's taking place. It's more strategic. It's not going to happen immediate, but it's important for not only public safety officials, but also county government, city council folks to understand what's happening, because they control budgets. And it's a big thing. They understand, what a land mobile radio system costs these days. There's a lot of money still being pumped into that. And so they look at those dollars, and we get some questions about it, and it's good that they understand what's taking place. And as part of that, one of the things we found out is that, and Sue asked a good question, how many people use an iPhone in their work today? And boy, we found out that, especially in the smaller communities, iPads, smartphones, a lot of our local public safety folks, they use these on a daily basis. And they're very creative with them. And it's, public safety is not waiting for FirstNet. It's out and about. But the challenge is, and the key point to take away from it is spectrum. You heard Sue talk about the spectrum. Mike talked about the spectrum. That's for real. It's beachfront property. The gentleman over here had mentioned the $45 billion auction. That was really Dust Bowl property. And so what FirstNet has is a big deal, and it makes it real. It certainly does. So it's a huge advantage for public safety. I really think it's going to be coming down the road. And the big advantage is, for instance, if this earthquake was maybe a little bit higher level, right now nobody would be able to get on their cell phone. But the public safety folks with a dedicated spectrum would at least have access to that. And the reason that's important is because of the percentage that we're seeing smart devices being used in public safety. And one of the reasons is because technology is readily available. And the other one is, as the younger generation moves into public safety, they've never known not using this technology. So they expect it. And that's a trend that's happening with the millennials. And we really need to provide a better service for public safety. So it's really phenomenal. We have a large percentage of just a small sample group, many of which use their own personal devices. They're using apps on those devices. We have some smaller groups that have taken an iPad and they have an app. They had an app developed that goes into their computer-aided dispatch system, and voila, they can self-dispatch. They can do everything right from an iPad. And now it's only as good as we have service. Service has gotten much better these days, and so there's lots of capabilities. But and I understand in this area, you get too far off the highway, you're gonna lose coverage. So that's a big deal, and so that's why we still recommend that everybody continue the investment in land mobile radio. But as time goes on, this coverage will get better and better, and the capabilities will be there. But it's really phenomenal. And the other thing I wanted to say about that, as this ties into another project that many of you are probably aware of, I know Karen is, Next Gen 911, is a lot of the smart devices today that are being used out there aren't tied into 911. And so that's another hurdle that we'll have to work through. And then hopefully, think of that FirstNet may be able to facilitate some of those connections in the future. So just kind of think strategically on that. The other part about, the consultation aspect of it is kind of looking at things that you can do today. This is a question that many of our stakeholders say, okay, I understand it's going to take a little bit of a time period here. What are the things that we can do today? So we try to focus them in on, okay, what are you doing for partnerships? I mean, most people here are familiar with the Homeland Security grants, and that's how we consolidate and build communication sites together. But what are we doing in the broadband space? Good point brought up earlier about E-rate program, and then how do you share fiber across jurisdictions, and that's a challenge. So I was just curious, for this group today, how well do the fire and police departments get along? I mean, is this, because sometimes you go to these meetings and fire guys are over there, police are over here. It's kind of hard to get them to communicate on the radio if they don't communicate in the room. So I'm just curious if you work good together or not, and that's fine if you don't, because I've seen it both ways, but it's one of the challenges, and hopefully FirstNet will bring that together. But it's really having open collaboration that is going to be a big deal on this project in the future. So that's one area where local public safety agencies can work on that by having advisory boards or groups who work together on their communication systems. One of the challenges is trust. And I've got a number of, and I have these PowerPoints and I can send them out to you through Karen's team. But it's really, let's see, let me get the right bullet here. I'm going to run these down. Okay, these are the 5 top things you have to do in a partnership. Political will. You got to get political will from some level to push it through. FirstNet's been very successful with getting the spectrum, and that was a result of the public safety community, really. And then belief in private sector value creation, commitment that the private sector can achieve value that the government cannot. And that's kind of where I think FirstNet's moving with the concept they're going to go with this network. And then there's got to be an underlying value, all right? It's got to be an interest to the private sector, and it's also got to be an interest to the government sector. Whenever you're doing a partnership, somebody's got to get value out of it. Reasonable. You got to have reasonable terms that aren't going to be one way from the federal government perspective, the state perspective, or the private sector. And then a willingness to pay transactions costs. There is going to be a fee for the service, and you have to negotiate that. One of the things that we tell our stakeholders today is, because I get that question a lot, is, well, how are we going to come up with the money to pay a monthly subscription cost to FirstNet? And when we start looking at it and analyze the current data, most of the agencies are already paying a fee for mobile data. So it should be pretty easy, to maybe leverage that if you think of it in that perspective. And then you have to be creative. If you don't have mobile data today and it's available, then we will have to be creative in how you're going to come up with that cost. But we find that many agencies today are paying maybe anywhere from $30 to $50 a month for mobile data. But that could be a challenge for organizations that don't have a funding capability. So that's recognized. But really, the bottom line is trust. And the federal government needs to trust state government, and vice versa. I'm from the state. I'm here to help, right? That goes over well when I go out to different communities. That's the other challenge. We've had some meetings that I guess I'd classify as pretty robust. And because when we go out and represent from the state, first reaction is, there's somebody here from the state. We're going to let them have it for an issue that may involve local government. And so you got to work through those issues. But the neat thing about it is also people respect the fact that you take the time and you go out and meet with them. We did a kind of a neat thing, I think. We called it whistle stops. We just sent team members out to all over the state, small towns, to meet with the local public safety officials, and some of it was coordinated, a lot of it wasn't. And that meant a lot to those folks because they never see anybody from the state come out and talk to them. So that's trying to build up goodwill and get their feedback on what's taking place. But anyways, it's a very big project. But in your communities, you need to be thinking about it now. For instance, the gentleman earlier mentioned, well, how can we leverage some of this stuff? If you're building a communication site today, if you're running power to that site, run fiber to that site, okay? Everything is connecting via fiber. Check out what's happening in your local area, whether it's utility, government, or the private sector. There's a tremendous amount of fiber connectivity that's being put into these cell sites. And the reason for that is what Mike mentioned. The bandwidth that's being used for Netflix and YouTube is absorbing all this connectivity. In Oregon alone, there's been over 500 sites, cell sites, that some of the fiber companies have just put in connectivity to, because the microwave systems they had supporting the cell sites could not support the bandwidth. So when you do these communication sites, build them so there's excess capacity, and then you have some capabilities to negotiate with whoever the carrier partner may be from this FirstNet RFP. You know, that's one thing that you can do is plan. And the other big thing, believe it or not, is identifying your organization who has the authority to sign an agreement or who has the ability to partner. Because as you all know, in government, these agreements take a long time. So experiment with that. That's a challenge. And it's going to be a challenge for the federal government as well as they work through this. And, you know, basically George, myself, and Karen, it's kind of our job to facilitate this the best we can. And these private-public partnerships are a big deal with how we do business in LMR today. I think that's going to continue into FirstNet, but it just may be with the local government to a partner. And that partner, the commercial partner, may have more flexibility. But try to figure that out, because a lot of times some of these big projects, even on the VTOP grants in the early days, San Francisco, they got in trouble because they had a governance group that didn't have authority to sign agreements. And so think about that. And the other thing is, you know, just be straight up with discussions. And, you know, it's a big deal, and it's an unfortunate thing. What happens in public safety communications is we normally don't pay attention to it until there's an event that triggers it. So try to stay the course, and I know people in this room believe that, but we have to convince that to the politicians that, hey, this is like a utility, this is a big deal, and we need to rally and support behind it. The last thing I'll say is, you know, 10 years ago, if I pulled this, if I told you, hey, there's going to be this smartphone that, by the way, has more capability than the computer you're using today, you'd laugh at me. And I think FirstNet's in the same boat. It's not when I think it's going to happen. I'm not sure when, but it's going to happen, and it's something we need, because it's a huge challenge. The biggest interoperability challenge I think we have isn't communications, it's funding, you know? And because of lack of integrated funding between agencies, it's difficult to get these systems built and share them. So it's a great advantage we have, you know, with the foundation they have with the $7 billion. So I think hopefully if you stay the course, and I wouldn't think that because you're out rural that you're not going to get it. I think sometimes the communities in rural areas have more flexibility and what you can do. And so I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today, and it's kind of it is a tough project, that's for sure. But the neat thing about it is that spectrum's for real, and the money's real, so I think it will happen, you know. So hopefully you stay with it and become a champion to work with Karen. All right, thank you. Yeah, anybody? Yeah, sure, if there's any questions.
Is there any precedence globally for the same type of network currently used by their public safety heroes?
Yes, actually, what's happening in the United States today is being replicated in Great Britain, in Germany, and I believe Australia. Yeah, to move towards LTE in support of public safety. Now, granted, both in Germany and Great Britain, much smaller countries, and they already have a little bit different system, you know, because I think the police in those areas are federally funded, and it's one organization across the nation, so it's a little bit different, but they are going to the same technologies. And I'll add one thing, and then I'll turn it over to Sue, because she probably has more information on this than I do, but there's a Public Safety Communications Research Laboratory in Boulder, Colorado, which is run by the Department of Commerce. They do a fabulous job in working nationally and internationally on these types of programs. So there's an event here in California and San Diego in June that if you have an opportunity to attend it, I think it's really well worth it, because that's what they actually bring people in from other countries to talk about what they're doing with their systems. So yeah, this isn't a U.S. only thing. This is happening in other places. And the other aspect of what's happening with this technology, it would actually, and I got this from T.J. Kennedy, who's the general manager from FirstNet, is when he came and talked to our stakeholders, he said, you know, this is kind of the first time that you'll see a public safety communications system that is built to go through upgrades, you know, because that's how the commercial carriers work. You get a system, and they get a funding source, and they'll have upgrades. Currently in LMR today, and that's the biggest challenge, you know, is Motorola or Harris or whatever you may use, is boy, as soon as you spend millions of dollars on that, you've not only, you can't upgrade it, you got to change it to another system. So it's kind of unique when you think about it that way. But it is a huge paradigm shift. Local agencies most likely aren't going to build the system. It's going to be deployed, and it's going to be a service that you subscribe to. So it's a huge change in how we do it today. And that's the big challenge that Sue and her team have. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but okay.
Hey, Steve, this is
Yep.
Carl.
Yep.
This is Carl. Real quickly to that gentleman's question as well. Canada has allocated 10 megahertz in the same spectrum. Mexico is moving in a similar direction, but a different spectrum, and we're in negotiations to try to figure out how to address that difficulty. But so North America is looking at this.
I saw an article in the BBC, ironically, you know, the British Broadcasting Network, talking about the system, the LTE system that New Jersey has commissioned and is apparently already using. Is that right? It's not in full use yet?
No, they're a grantee as well for the BTOP grant, so they've actually gone out with an RFP, and they're going to deploy deployables, actually. So they're in the process of actually going out with that. But I don't know of any LTE system that they have individually.
Okay.
So
all right.
It's
I
in
won't take any
process.
more of your time
No, it's in
about that,
process.
but I appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess it's my turn. Thank you very much. I'm George Molnar from the state of Nevada, and I just want to acknowledge Steve for his very nice comments about my generation. You know, the older folks here in the room, you know, have recognized that there is a change coming, that there is a new world of communications, and this is it. It is, to coin a phrase, a big deal. I've heard that around the room. I think Joe Biden started that once upon a time about some kind of big deal. So it is a big deal. It's a very big deal. And one of the principles that I started off with in public safety is that I don't work for anybody. I don't think you guys work for anybody. I don't think anybody in our business works for anybody, but we work with everybody. I think it's really a big, important distinction to say that we work with everybody. And I think that's represented here because we have FirstNet, representing the United States, California, Oregon, Nevada, California, all in California, talking about working together, working with each other. And if there's one thing I'd like you to get from this meeting, is that you have the power to work with the entire spectrum of public safety responders. And that entire spectrum is not just, who said it was guns, hoses, and bandages? It's more than that. In Nevada, we have a public safety communications committee that includes representatives from our education system, from our hospitals, from our public utilities. These are people, these are organizations, these are servants who will be vital to the success of this network. Not just because there aren't enough cops and firefighters and medics to go around to pay the $30 a month to make this thing work. Even if we all bought something, it probably wouldn't be enough. To Sue's point, they need to make sure they have revenue to make this thing work. $7 billion will start it, but it won't make it go. So we need to broaden that base. And FirstNet's looking very closely at how to broaden that base, be it extra spectrum, maybe, or additional users. So think about how your forest rangers, your fish and wildlife people, your educators, who are the first responders when something bad happens at schools? They should be involved in interoperable communications from the get-go. So think about that. Bring them into your conversations. Work with them. And I think that's the real takeaway from this kind of thing. The second point that I want to break into before asking for questions is this is a network for data. This is not an LMR voice network. It's not going to replace your repeaters. The gentleman earlier said that, or the young lady, I believe, back there said that she was going to have a replacement of radio systems. Do it well, do it for the long haul, because I'm a certain number of years old, and I have a feeling that as long as I'm on this earth, LMR will still be around on this earth. It will be here tomorrow. It will be here when my 16-year-old goes through the academy and he gets out in the street. She wants to be a cop. I'm sorry, firefighters, but she's going to have it for her whole career. And granted, yeah, she's got the smartphone and she's part of that trillions of bits of texting that's going on. Believe me, I see the bill. Invest in your LMR. Increase the coverage. Because this is a network for data. It will bring all kinds of amazing things that we didn't think possible a few years ago. It will also enable something called the Internet of Things. CHP, anybody from CHP in the room? Okay, hi guys, sorry, didn't notice you there. That happens all the time. I fly past a car and I didn't notice the CHP there. How does that work? So, you have these things called extenders in your cars. You still have them in a lot of your cars, right? Because you're out in a rural area and your walkie-talkie, your handheld radio, it doesn't reach back to everywhere all the time. So you have an extender. Same thing with this broadband. Your car, your truck, your vehicle, your whatever it is, will have a hotspot. Will have higher power, higher bandwidth. So when you're on an incident, the network comes with you. You can provide coverage for your responders. So everybody doesn't have to have the 50-watt radio. That'll be happening. What we talk about in Nevada is all along our, 608-mile border with California, in all of our 17 counties with our 27 tribes, and our tremendous tracts of rural space. We got a lot of cops that are out there alone. What about a vest? What about a vest with a built-in GPS sensor and a built-in broadband device and a little computer and a little battery pack and all that kind of stuff that he's wearing? It's ballistic, great, super wonderful. But if something happens in the field, his heart rate goes up, respirations change, dispatch knows. Say he gets assaulted, punched, stabbed, shot, falls over, whatever. Accelerometers in that vest say, something has happened. Badge number 12345 is in trouble. He doesn't have to fumble for the button. He doesn't have to call for help and give a report, but dispatch knows what's going on. This Internet of Things is going to be so important to us. And think about what you're going to do with that in your profession, in your circle of need, and then get that to Karen. But she's going to have to add all that bandwidth up and say, yeah, this network needs a lot of bandwidth. Because at the end of the shift, everybody comes home safe. That's what matters. And so I'm asking you, work with us to find out what it takes to get everyone home safe. And if you have any questions, I am here to answer them. Thank you very much. It must be lunchtime or something.
We're getting close to a break. And part of listening to Steve and to George is these are our border partners. So as instance fires, I see CAL FIRE here, fires usually don't care if there's a border. CHP, I know that sometimes you have to cross borders. And so the same with a lot of the other law enforcement and fire services in the room. These networks, with the commitment that we have from our other states and that we have from FirstNet, will provide you those same communication, interoperable communications, no matter where you are. And that's what we want to make sure happens in California. And so I know you haven't heard this enough today. Get us your information, let us know what you need, and be champions for this, and to help us give you the network that you need. So with that, we're going to take a quick break, 10 minutes? Yeah? Oh, of course. Maybe. No.
Yeah, no, I'll be real quick. I forgot to mention this. If you're interested, one of our most progressive organizations is located in Medford, Oregon, which isn't terribly far from here, and it's the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. So it's a relatively small group, about 200 and something officers, but they have integrated smartphones into their work, have several apps that they use. They have one of these apps that actually enables their smartphone. So one of the buttons is a push to talk, and it goes back to the LMR system. And they incorporate that into, which is a big thing now, is video system in the schools, so they can monitor that on their smartphone as well. So if you're ever interested, let Karen know, and we can arrange a visit. They're happy to show you what they have, and it's pretty progressive. And what we do is we recommend that our stakeholders go see it in person, because it's probably as close as a representation of what I would anticipate you would see in FirstNet in the future. So sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier. Yes, ma'am.
So they're using commercial carriers now?
Yes, they use a combination. They use like 2 different carriers. Verizon's one, and I'm not sure if the other's AT&T or not, but yes, that's what they use. And we actually had them at our consultation, and it was good that the officers presented, and they got the fact that they don't have enough spectrum today. So they're very excited about the opportunity for FirstNet, and we did a live demo showing their capabilities, what they currently had. And if they had some of the FirstNet spectrum, I think they'd have a little bit better capability in what they're doing. So it was nice to see our law enforcement folks coming in and championing FirstNet. And so that's the goal of both Karen and George, and as well as the fire and EMS, is to get those folks involved and spread the word, and also the capabilities, because there's a lot of capabilities out there that you can utilize. And these smartphones and how you set them up, it's like the old BlackBerry. With email, it goes to a server. Same thing with a smartphone, goes to a server, connects to your LMR system today. So some pretty cool things out there. All right, thank you.
And I wanted to mention that also app, they can lock down the schools remotely.
That's correct.
So it is a really cool system, so they can actually lock down the schools as soon as they know that there's an incident happening. Medford's not too far away from here, so truly if anybody's interested, just let me know and we can arrange something to have people go up and take a look at it. So with that, break, 10 minutes? Okay, thanks.
Hello, everybody. My name's Carl Rebstock. What I think I'm going to do, having listened to all these presentations, is I think I'm going to go through just the first few slides, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. And if there aren't any questions, I'm going to throw some back at you and see if we can get a discussion going. Because as As different as the tribal perspective is, there are also a lot of similarities with respect to rural America. My background is 30 years in the military, and yeah, I know I look young. You should have seen me as a second lieutenant in the infantry. That was painful. And then worked quite a bit with tribes up in the Pacific Northwest, mostly dealing with emergency management. Oops. All right, so I had intended to cover these six things, and I think we'll still cover down all of these, but like I said, I'd like to try to do it by engaging in a conversation with you. So what it'll do for us, who is us, will it reach you out on your reservation, out in your community? How much will it cost us? How much will it cost you? Will you make any money off of it? And why care? So this slide and the next few slides, I've chosen to try to give us a chance to pause and to reflect on the importance of this initiative. It's a very technical initiative, but at its very essence, it's all about taking care of one another, of safeguarding the people we value, our children, our children's children, our parents, our grandparents, people with disabilities, people in distress. So what we're trying to do here is pretty sweeping, and yet it's what we all do all the time. It also will support those people who help safeguard the people we love, the places we cherish, the things we treasure, and in the process of doing so, often put their lives on the line. So while it's a highly technical issue, it gets down to people helping people, neighbor helping neighbor. And that's why I chose this particular slide. This slide was taken by Kevin Lennon, who's a council member with the Sauk-Suiattle tribe, north of Seattle. On the 17th of April, 2014, there was a landslide, the State Route 530 landslide, or the Oso mudslide. 43 people perished in that landslide, and the Sauk-Suiattle tribe was isolated as a result. I know you here in California are well aware of landslides and their impacts. This had some profound impacts on Kevin and the families of those 43 people. It occurred at 10:37 in the morning on a Saturday. So think about what your Saturday mornings are like. You're lounging in bed, you're enjoying a good breakfast, you're roughhousing with the kids, you're out walking the dog. Those are all the things that the people in this community were doing at 10:37 when their lives were ended in a slurry that washed down a hill. A friend of mine was one of the first responders on one side of that spill. He stands 5 feet 10 inches tall, and with his 2 eyes looking out from that vantage point, when he first arrived on the scene from one direction, he saw one woman frantically waving in a certain direction. He saw also some trees leaned over, pointing the other direction. So he had some 40 years in the fire service, and he looked at that and he said the incident must have happened over there and pushed those trees over that way. Why she was frantically waving in the opposite direction, he couldn't understand. A very similar thing was happening on the other side of the landslide. They didn't know that there were responders on both sides of the landslide. They didn't know the magnitude of it. They didn't have a common operating picture. Here's the most amazing part. The person who put that common operating picture together was a dispatcher. So the dispatcher was getting all these calls in from all these different responding groups, and he brought it all together, and he realized what had happened was the land had slumped. The land had slid all the way across the road, washed up on the other side of the road on a mountainside, sloshed back like a big bowl of oatmeal. And so those trees that were pushed over were actually the backwash. And as we all learned later, it was that backwash that made the recovery operation so difficult because everything was just tumultuous. It was all turned over. It would have helped a whole lot if they had had a common operating picture and been able to understand the magnitude of the event. So this is a seismograph. This is a seismograph taken about a year earlier, on the 17th of April, 2013, in Texas, in a town called West Texas. It starts over on the left-hand side at about 5 o'clock at night. It's about 70 degrees. It's a beautiful evening. 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 7:50. That's when, bam, that's when that happens. The fertilizer production plant in this town, West Fertilizer Production, exploded. That seismograph is readily available data. You now know more than the responders did looking just at that seismograph. That was an enormous explosion. They had no idea. Here's what transpired.
West fire. The West Fertilizer is one of their mills is on fire. There's heavy smoke coming out of the top of it. I was just about to do that. System West Fire. System West Fire. Needs to respond to West Fertilizer plant. They have a fire out there again. West Fire out to West Fertilizer plant.
Fire. 15 people died, 12 of them responders. Just imagine now if the incident had been dealt with differently, if they had something like this. And I recognize that when I hold up this in this crowd, understanding the demographic of this crowd, many of you are thinking talking, but as we've heard, there's a lot more about data that goes over this, right? So the kind of data that could go over this. Instead of that caller trying to describe what happened, there was actually somebody that took streaming video of the explosion. There were people that knew the magnitude of this. That might have been sent to 911 if it were able to collect that. Imagine also if then a map of the area, of the vulnerable buildings and people in that area, of the hazard-prone corollary damage that might occur, if that could be sent to the responders. What if the material data safety sheet about the hazardous materials in that building could be shared with responders so they knew what they were walking into? Remember, 12 of the 15 people that died were responders. They did not know what they were walking into. Imagine if a diagram that showed the extent of the damage and what was being done about it, so that you knew that certain structures had been impacted, you knew that certain gas valves had been turned off and others had not been turned off. So when Sue was talking about the kinds of things that might be on FirstNet, sure, it may be devices like this. And yes, it'll probably be mobile data terminals, but it'll probably be sensors as well. Sensors that are installed on things that when something goes wrong, there's a signal automatically. It'll probably be seismograph information that's automatically transmitted. So imagine how different the world would be if this kind of information were made available to first responders on a particular incident. And it can be, and in some cases it is being, like the example that was given earlier. So they show up on the scene ready and able to do the job and to come home safely. So it's all about the data. That's a simple thing to say, but it gets tricky when we get down to the details. And here's where I want to sort of open up the conversation. Because when we talk about it all about the data, one of the things that Mike brought up was priority and preemption. And when it comes to the tribes, let's talk about this. We've already talked a little bit about the sensitivities around data. You know that if Department of Defense decides to participate in this network, they're going to be very concerned about who has their data. And I'll bet you that the Yurok tribe is going to be very concerned about who gets their data, under what circumstances, for what purposes, for what duration. How is that going to be decided? Whose priorities and who has the right to preempt? Who says that someone else is more important than someone else? Where are those decisions made? Where are they made? So we don't have any good answers for that. At the state level, in California, my understanding is that you no longer have a state interoperability executive committee. I don't think you do. Not right now. It will be back. It will be back because right now at the state level, and I'm drilling this home for the tribes that are here, we've got 3 gentlemen from 3 tribes. The state level, those decisions are made often by state interoperability executive committees. How about the tribal participation on SIECs? And if there is tribal participation on an SIEC, is it one person who presumably communicates with all the tribes? In Alaska, where there are, 229? How's this going to work? How is it going to work? Or, and I'm looking for some feedback here, let's talk about a national SIEC. What do you think about that? Is there benefit to Indian country, across the country, developing some body that will perform in the capacity of an SIEC at the state level, but for sovereign nations, so that they can discuss the sensitivities associated with their data, just like the federal government's going to do. We've got something called the ECPC right now, the Emergency Communications Planning Commission. Right now, that's where many of the agencies are discussing the kinds of decisions regarding whether Department of Interior, Department of Defense, Treasury, all the kind of data that's going to flow over this network, and the federal government will have to discuss. How is Indian country going to discuss this? And I suppose by extension, really, how's rural America going to address this? So we know that we've got a SPOC, a state single point of contact. What does that mean to the tribes? This is the bear, this is the elephant in the room, right? What does it mean? Tell me what it means. Somebody. What's that? You communicate with her. How you doing? Sound okay? So everything goes through the state. All the tribes' involvement goes through the state. Every state, 5 territories in the District of Columbia where there are tribes, all goes through the state single point of contact. Sometimes that works well because they've got a good relationship. Sometimes it doesn't work so well. What happens when it doesn't work well? What are we going to do? Then play that out. Keep playing that out, right? So then in places where it doesn't play out so well, the state decides to opt out of the building of the network, right? And they have not been in communication with the tribes, or for that matter, perhaps not even sufficiently with rural parts of the community. So the interests of the tribes, where they need coverage, who needs coverage, for what reasons, aren't well known by the state because they haven't worked together. Maybe the state's fault, maybe the tribe's fault. State opts out, they have to develop the plan has to meet our approval. We're in Washington, D.C. We'll do the best we can at assessing how accurately the state has considered the needs of the other jurisdictions, the very best we can. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm going up the coast on to Lincoln City to meet with affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians next week, and I'm stopping off at tribes along the way. I want to talk. I want you to talk to me. I want people to understand and communicate with one another. Because if that doesn't work well, then the tribes may get left out of this. And that would be a tragedy. That would be a tragedy, not just for public safety, right? Because we've already learned that there's a second possibility that excess capacity, which is probably going to be a lot of it in rural America, may be leased out for secondary purposes, distance education, telemedicine. So let's talk about that. Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for that? In the state, each jurisdiction is going to pay for that. Individual entities will choose to subscribe or not subscribe. We know the cost is going to be comparable to what you're already paying. We know it's going to be competitive. We believe we're going to add extra value, so we may charge a premium for that. But it's up to you about whether you're going to choose to pay it. At the tribes, Let's talk about public safety. Who's going to pay those subscription fees? Who should pay those subscription fees? Is there an argument to be made that under the trust responsibility that the federal government has to ensure the safety of the tribes, that the federal government should pay those fees? Is there an argument? What about the tribes where they don't provide their own law enforcement, where the Bureau of Indian Affairs provides all the law enforcement coverage? Remember I told you it's all voluntary? What happens if the Bureau of Indian Affairs decides they don't want to participate in FirstNet? I don't think that's going to happen. But then all of a sudden, those tribes where the BIA provides law enforcement don't have FirstNet only because a federal agency decided they didn't want it. The tribes are left out again. Now let's talk about the secondary use, right? Distance education, healthcare. Is it conceivable that Department of Interior should budget to pay for those fees as well under its trust responsibility? Is that an argument to be made? I don't know. A lot of questions. So what we are doing is standing up a tribal working group. We went out to 18 tribal organizations, international, national, and regional. In the case of Alaska, we chose 4 state-specific organizations because it's Alaska. It's enormous, and everything is different there when it comes to tribes. They're going to help us navigate some of the things. They meet next month on Sunday, the 22nd of February. Do you know what Sunday the 22nd of February is? It's the anniversary of FirstNet. The legislation was passed on the 22nd of February. So what better way than to bring together the tribal working group on the anniversary of FirstNet and get folks who are somewhat argumentative, somewhat thought-provoking, somewhat challenging, and really press us for some difficult answers to some difficult questions. And they're not all that much different than for the rural parts of the country. Some are, but others aren't. So what kind of questions have you got? I've thrown out a bunch of things. We have a panel discussion coming up here in a moment. It'll be another opportunity to throw some hardballs at us. Yes, yes, Sue. Yeah, please.
Working group commissioned out of the PSAC?
Good point.
I mean, it's important, I mean, because it comes through that advisory group, right?
Very good point.
Okay.
Right. So FirstNet, or the legislation required that the Public Safety Advisory Committee get stood up. It's got 40 representatives. One of those representatives is a gentleman named Richard Broncho. I'll show you a picture of him. No, I don't have a picture of him. Richard Broncho, who's Nez Perce. He's on the PSAC. He's on SAFECOM, and now he's the chair of the Tribal Working Group. PSAC decided we need input from Indian country. We're going to stand up this body. And that's what this group is meant to help us do. Advise us on these issues, because there are these issues, and then there are a whole slew of other related issues that are equally unclear and uncertain. FirstNet is moving fast. It's evolving all the time, but part of the reason it's evolving is because we're getting input from all of you about things we're doing well, things we could do better. And that tribal working group will be instrumental in helping us navigate some challenging issues in Indian country, because I do not want the tribes left behind. And it is going to be challenging, in large part because of this requirement to work through the states. But let's hit on that before I finish this up. And then, yes, sir, I'll ask you. On the point, the good reason for working through the states, okay, because there are good reasons. One, it's the law. And it turns out a law trumps an executive order. Executive Order 13175 that requires all federal agencies to consult with the tribes on a nation-to-nation basis. Right? But it's the law, it trumps the executive order, so we have to do it. That's one reason. Another good reason, think about it. If you are going to do something on your reservation, in your community, you're going to take a look at your jurisdiction, you're going to break it up into manageable chunks, you're going to conduct a business plan and figure out how to do that. That's what they did when they figured out FirstNet. We've got a country, 50 states, 5 territories, 1 district. All the boundaries of those fit together. They're the building blocks. So logically, it makes sense. It's an easy way to construct a network that covers the entire country. And then lastly, ideologically, at the very heart of what FirstNet represents is neighbor helping neighbor. Anything that divides a community undermines the very essence of what we're trying to do. We're trying to build relationships, build the ability for people who are overwhelmed to get assistance from those that are near enough to provide it. So there are good reasons for working through the states. Yes, sir.
Okay, Tom Fielden, Karuk Tribe, Office of Emergency Services. I got a couple of things
good
on this.
Hit them hard.
First of all, we've got 3 tribal clinics, one that serves a rural area of Wairika and Siskiyou County, and 2 that serve remote areas in Orleans and Happy Camp in Humboldt and Siskiyou County, respectively. Most recently, about a year and a half ago, we got awarded a grant to put in 72 strands of fiber optic between Somes Bar, California, which is on the Siskiyou County border, to McKinleyville, which should be finished around mid-2016. And my question is where would the tribe fit in with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because it does touch on that one question about how much you might make out of this. We talked about it being a $7 billion project. That's just the beginning. There's going to be a lot of companies making a lot of money when they bid for business with the federal government in response to that RFP. It's not entirely clear to me. I'm not a business development guy, but my understanding is that you need to contact those people in your communities and find out if there's an opportunity for you to participate in that bid as a subcontractor. Probably not as a prime, I wouldn't imagine, but this is really outside of my realm. There will be an enormous amount of need. Not just think of it, not just the infrastructure. We need people who are going to design apps. We need people who are going to pick up the phones at call centers, at customer service centers. And I know that the tribes are doing a lot of work in that arena for other industries. There's a lot of moving parts to this. Using existing infrastructure is an interesting point. I know that when we first started talking about this, the idea was we're going to build on what's out there already. That's going to allow us to rapidly accelerate the stand-up of this network, because there's so much out there already. But then we talk about it being reliable. So if you're patching together all of this existing infrastructure, how are you going to guarantee 99.99% reliability, or 5 nines? How are you going to do that if you don't have control over it? So it gets dicey, it gets hard. I've seen a sort of a change in thinking that maybe what we'll do if we get a strategic national partner or partners is we'll first look at their network, because they got their arms around that network. They can guarantee how well run it is. And then maybe on certain instances like yours, they might come and say, hey, we need coverage out here. We hear you've got a good, reliable, solid network. We want to work with you. So maybe it's waiting and seeing, or maybe you proactively go talk to AT&T, Sprint, Verizon, the likely candidates. Google, what if that happened? Talk to them and say, hey, we're out here. We've got a great network. So when you build that network, the other thing I would encourage you to do is take a look at our standards. What's the body that just released the standards for public safety grade? Dipstick. Erase that. Oh boy. Well, I'll put up my resume. Yeah. So you want to check that out, right? So if you're building towers, you're putting down cable, you're hardening junction boxes, because there are hunters out there that if they can't kill a deer, will shoot at a junction box. You want to make sure that you build that thing to these public safety grade standards so that your equipment is such that we're interested, or that strategic national partner or partners is interested. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Weedy Hannibal from Butte County, telecommunications manager, but I also am the vice chair of the Northern Planning Area of CalSeek. And we are a group of 18 counties or operational areas, as well as we had a tribal member. And the tribal member at the very onset of CalSeek was very, very much involved in our planning process and what we do. Unfortunately, she passed away. When that happened, it was difficult to re-engage and get someone to be a part of it. Now, fortunate for us, a lot of our area is rural. Nobody told us CalSeek went away. So our members have decided that they're going to continue meeting, regardless of whether there are funds available. It doesn't matter, because the relationships that we built were important. And so on the break, I spoke with Karen and I spoke with Sue, and I'm supposed to be the statewide chairman. I would be glad to continue those meetings, because I, like you, and like in Oregon, that's a really important piece to this. We have relationships that we've already built within our 18 counties.
Yeah.
And we get a regular participation of between 14 to 16 counties at every meeting. That's how important this project is to us.
Right.
So we will be champions.
Wonderful.
For
Wonderful.
FirstNet.
And let's hope that you get more tribal participation on your group. You said something early on that just caught me. You said it doesn't matter, and of course it matters more than anything. Yeah. Yes, fire away.
So you talked about the law taking precedent over executive order and so forth.
Yeah.
But in our area, we currently have problems keeping our communication sites up and going now and in the future.
Yeah.
So if you can't get the parties to play together and cell sites or communication sites disappear, what teeth does the law have to make that happen?
I don't think it does.
So it's...
So then there are losers.
Well, but it could cut the communication link to our entire county.
It could. So you see, the stakes are high. And there are some communities, oh yeah, so I should also clarify. I talked about consultation in the sense of what we're doing for FirstNet operationally. There's a whole other aspect of FirstNet looking at environmental historical issues through the National Environmental Protection Act, National Historic Preservation Act. Those laws are very clear. That tribal consultation is well understood. We've already begun that process, so we are consulting with the tribes and with all other jurisdictions in full compliance of NEPA and NHPA. So your tribe may see someone from FirstNet come knock on the door, ready to consult nation to nation with respect to NEPA and NHPA, and then another person come in another door and say, you've got to go through the state SPOC because we can't consult with you. Now we're working this hard. We're working this hard. And we'll come up with a solution that makes sure the tribes are not left out. But I need your help. I need your input. We had a request for information. We had one request for information. We had one tribe respond to the RFI. It was a really good response. It came from the Navajo Nation. Really good response. Really important and has really helped change our thinking. But that was one reply. I need to hear from more folks. Yeah, another question. Okay, I think we're ready for the panel. Oh, yeah, one more. One more. Just, there are all sorts of ways to get involved. Internet, SPOCs, PSAC, Tribal Working Group. These are the three folks that FirstNet has really charged with helping reach out to Indian country. The good-looking guy on the right, that's me. The guy on the left is Kevin McGinnis. He's one of Sue's counterparts. He's on the National Board of Directors. What federal agency do you know that has a board of directors? He used to run the emergency medical services for the state of Maine, but the board designated him as a tribal contact, and before there were many employees at all, he was crisscrossing the country working with tribes, and he gets it. He understands it. He's a passionate advocate for the things that we've talked about. In the middle, I don't have a picture right now for Richard, but Richard is with the Nez Perce. He's the chair of the Tribal Working Group. He's the National Congress of American Indians delegate to the PSAC as well as to SAFECOM. Great guy. We're looking forward to a good meeting. I'll try to share information with everyone after that meeting. Okay, thanks everybody.
I wanted to add one more thing on the tribal consultation piece. Cynthia Gomez, I don't know if everyone is aware, Cynthia Gomez is appointed by the governor to be the tribal liaison. She's also on our California Board of Directors for the First Responder Network. And then Governor's Office of Emergency Services also has a tribal representative, Denise Shemensky. Both of them have been very involved. We work with them regularly on our process. So reaching out to them, reaching out to me, either way, the information will get back to us. Thanks. And then our next panel is going to have more of a local perspective, so I'm just going to turn it right now over to Chris, because you're closest.
In the hot seat, huh? I guess one of the first thoughts that comes to mind is we've got roughly 40 different fire agencies locally, or in Humboldt County, I should say, 3 of which are paid agencies, but the funding, you know, we talked a little bit about that. How much of this is going to be something, become an unfunded mandate for local government, I guess, or I should say the volunteer agencies that, you know, that's one of the concerns. My chief is the president of the fire chiefs, county fire chiefs, so this is one of the things he's going to have to go back and address when these things start coming.
Louis Brunk. Extremely, maybe I don't have to keep on holding the button. And first of all, we're extremely grateful for the opportunity to dialogue with some of the principals for FirstNet. And when the opportunity came up, I thought, wow, they're going to talk to lots and lots of people and lots of groups of town hall meetings, and what can we do to stand out so they'll remember the discussion they had here? So I thought of the earthquake. Yeah.
It won't be forgotten.
And along the lines of what Chris was saying, for us, really sustainability is going to be the issue for anything that we do in terms of communication. Right now, you know, our agency, other agencies, were really spread very, very thin. Hoopa Tribe had to go to the county for funding to sustain their EMS system. And that doesn't, we don't anticipate that those types of needs are going to continue. So in the future, you know, what we have been encountering for our agency, and I think that I can speak for other agencies throughout the county, is that very often what we're, in our relationship with the state, there's expectations that the state puts on us, expectations of what our abilities are and what our needs are, that really you look outside and you look at the hills around us, that's our reality. We are separated, our topography really defines us. And that's going to be an issue where we may not be may not fit into a model that 98% of the rest of the country can fit into. So that's something that we're going to be having. We definitely want to take advantage of any opportunities to improve our communications in our county for our first responders. That is key. We really do have needs, very acute needs in many cases. And we do want to, again, express our gratitude for you for being here today, and look forward to finding opportunities to work together.
Hey, so with respect to EMS, Kevin McGinnis, our national board member, makes a great argument for it. He looks at rural communities and tribes, and he says, what if we can get telemedicine to those people? You may be aware the state of Alaska is doing some remarkable stuff because they do not have enough providers out in the bush. But if you can bring in an expert right to someone in a rural community who rarely sees whatever particular incident they're dealing with, that could save lives and change lives.
Well, thank you. This has been really informative for us, and I look forward to working with Weedy on the Kelsey. And more questions. Hold on.
I wanted to echo what Carl was saying first on the telemedicine. I was up at a meeting, I can't remember honestly if it was here or if it was in Reading, but it was one of the Broadband Consortium meetings, and we talked a lot about telemedicine, especially in the rural areas. There is huge benefits through FirstNet with telemedicine. If you can just imagine having FirstNet attached to the first responders, whether it's the ambulance or the fire department that gets out there, and they're able to connect immediately with a doctor. It will change lives, and especially in the rural areas where the hospitals are so few and far between. So that is one area I'm really excited about because I really do believe it will change. It will absolutely change everything. There's a
question. No.
Yeah, okay. And then we received a question, so I'm going to read it and then I'm going to provide an answer. Most of the functional voice communication systems in Northern California are VHF, low band, VHF. How does FirstNet plan to incorporate this into its network? Are the plans in place? FirstNet will not incorporate VHF, low band, or VHF into the LTE network. Two different technologies. And so this is where we need to keep our LMR systems up and running and continue to build them out if you need more coverage. They will be in place for a long time. And then as LTE progresses, eventually it will take the place of the radios, but not in the foreseeable future.
Mendocino County. I don't know if I need this or not. More in detail on that question, what I was really focused on is everyone in public safety knows very well that your land mobile radio systems aren't going away in this terrain. You've got to have lower frequencies to communicate. Voice is critical. Your officer alone out in the woods, if he can't contact dispatch, there's no point. So really we are talking two completely different things. I understand you're talking about a data network, but more specific to the question, if I can state it properly, is voice over IP is something that's commonplace now. Why aren't we focusing on incorporating the voice circuits in these networks that we already have into FirstNet? Why isn't that even being discussed? Because it's a simple matter of conversion from voice to data to then put it onto a larger network, and then you do have cross communication between agencies. That was the question more specifically. Sorry it wasn't worded better.
Yeah, and we go back to mission critical, and and this is where I'm going to be looking to the more technical people in the room because I will mess this up. But I believe what you're talking about over voice over IP for the radios or P25. And I don't believe that P25 is deployed throughout California. At the state level, is that what you were?
I wasn't specific to P25.
Okay.
I'm an ex-radio guy, now I'm an internet guy. I kind of have my hands in both pies right now.
Okay.
And so more specifically, it's just the voice communication on our 911 system. I mean, it's what I'm really trying to find out is, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
We're okay with that.
I think you know what?
I apologize.
I think I can answer your question.
Thank you.
It is a data network, but as you know, you have voice over IP. What we're differentiating is mission critical voice. Okay. So when we deploy it, we'll have voice on LTE, just like you have voice over LTE today on your commercial networks. But the mission critical components may not be available to some later point. So it's not that it's going to be data only, because it is IP, right, as you know.
Right.
But what we're differentiating is what we're really talking about is people want mission critical voice. And we're saying that will not be available to a future date. But voice over LTE is available. Mm-hmm. Does that help?
I understand. I don't want to beat a dead horse.
Okay.
I simply wanted to know if there was any real focus on marrying these two very different technologies, because when it comes right down to the root of it, technically it's not that difficult to take analog voice, mission critical, 911 type call over a two-way radio and make sure that it can now be transported through a much larger nationwide network. I mean, it may not just be a fire at Joe's house, it may be a bomb threat at the school, and you want to make sure that this voice communication over an old land mobile network is dispatched to the proper people at the FBI or somewhere in Washington, D.C. Do you understand where I'm going with that?
Yeah.
I do.
Can I
okay.
maybe
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let me try a technical bent. The answer is yes.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, part of FirstNet is not only going to provide the commercial grade cellular, the voice over IP, but what you're really talking about is a gateway.
Right.
Gatewaying the radio systems you have now into the FirstNet commercial grade voice on a push-to-talk application. They will provide that out of the box.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, at their last town hall, we actually had it demonstrated in Sacramento where they had push-to-talk radio in, what was it, Texas and Colorado, and we were listening on LTE in Sacramento.
Right.
So the answer is yes.
Okay, good. And that's something I haven't been able to nail down. This is my second town hall meeting, and I just really wanted to make sure that that's, if there's not already an answer, that there's a true focus on what is important. And what's important is the guy alone in the woods, in the redwoods, who can only talk on VHF, needs to have someone on the horn that he can talk to when he is dealing with a Unabomber. Okay?
Yep.
That's all.
No, it, very much acknowledged.
Thank you.
We often don't, in the first round here, go down to that level of detail, though.
Well, and thank you for the question. And after Mike explained it, I actually knew the answer. But did anybody else have? There's a question.
Mike seems like the person that might know this. It was discussed at break. Will we have to get new devices, or will all the devices in the patrol cars for Yawk Tribe or City Fire, you know, will they all work, or the phone in my pocket will be able to connect to it, or do we have to get new devices and connect to a different, basically, essentially, are you now, like Chris brought up, he has to carry 2 phones already. Is he going to now have a third one for this only?
I'll give a shot, and Sue and some of the other guys may have an answer as well. The short answer on this one is yes. This 700 megahertz frequency is called band class 14. You don't have it on your phones today. Now, when they build a phone, though, you know, a Qualcomm or something like that has all those frequencies available in there, and they choose what to punch in for your particular carrier. So that's why they want you to buy a different phone if you or keep you on their network. They're new, and we've seen a number of vendors' prototypes right now. They're coming out with multi-band phones that will include band 14. And I know, in fact, Bill Schreier, the point of contact in Washington, he advocates that band 14 ought to be on everybody's phone. Now, he's a little political, but you know, think about it. That way, if you were using your personal cell phone as a volunteer fireman, you could get authorized to use band class 14 on it too. So anyways, the answer is yes. And so if you got a vehicular modem in your squad car or something in your hand, it's going to need to carry that new band class.
So Mike, the other side of Bill's comment is the possibility that if it's in every cell phone, then every 911 call would pop up onto the FirstNet spectrum and go through when something happens. So Bill Schreier makes some interesting cases for that prospect.
I'll add one more to that. The idea is, this gets down to cost too. The idea is the higher volume you can make a handset, the cheaper it's going to be. So it's to our advantage to have as many people as possible have something that's a FirstNet capable device. Make it cheaper for all.
Okay, we're there.
I just have one quick comment. To the gentleman in the back, the most important thing to take away, well, I shouldn't say that. One of the things that's important to take away on this is that FirstNet is a network. It is not a defined application. So by having the ability to transmit data over a large, very robust network, that opens up the application frontier. So where you have a VoIP kind of situation, where you have a need for a gateway, applications like that exist already. I'm sure they will continue to grow and develop. They will be applicable to the FirstNet environment. So you'll be able to have that, not necessarily with a FirstNet branded app, but whatever app is vetted for operation on the network that your organization chooses to use. So FirstNet is not necessarily a suite of applications. It's not a thing that you buy that has, you know, vitamin C, thiamine, riboflavin, and all that other stuff. It's the box. It's a very nice box, and you put in it what you think is right for your agency and your organization.
Okay, were there any other questions? There was one other comment I wanted to make, and actually Chris Emmons prompted this. So we talked a little bit about it, but we probably did not hit this exactly. No one has to use FirstNet. You will never be obligated to use FirstNet. This is not like a narrowbanding edict that came down and said you shall narrowband by this date. You don't have to use it. And that's one of the challenges with FirstNet, is that they have to make this so appealing and such of a good network that you see the benefits of this, and the price needs to be right, and then you want to subscribe. And I truly believe having a dedicated public safety network, you will all benefit. But that will be FirstNet's job in all of this, to make sure they meet your needs, which goes back to why we're here today, is we need to know what those needs are. So, was this helpful today for you? I've learned a lot throughout the day. I will offer this. Poor Sue has so much to do, and I apologize. But if you have folks in your cities, your counties, that need more information and would like to have a sit down and have more of a one-on-one conversation, so they understand this more and understand the benefits to them, please let us know, and we could schedule a meeting, come up, meet one-on-one, and explain this. This is so important. So I wanted to commit that to all of you, and we'll be glad to do that. So with that, I wanted to just let you guys know some other upcoming events that you might be interested in. We're going to have a federal partners town hall the first week of March. We don't have the date scheduled yet. I think it's going to be in the Bay Area someplace. It will be on the webinar if anybody's interested. One of the things that I've been working with the federal point of contact is that we have so many federal partners in California that we really need to start working better together, and so we're going to have something similar like this with all our federal partners. We're going to be inviting our bordering states because they have the same federal partners in their states. And so we want to make this very robust and get those conversations going. There's an APCO Western National Conference coming up, and I believe Jeff Johnson will be one of the keynote speakers, as well as Mark Ghirlandaci, who is my boss, and he will be talking about, FirstNet, about emergency services that we provide, and the importance of communication across the board. We also will be having one of our CalFriend board meetings there, and Jeff Johnson has been gracious enough to say that he will also meet with our board members, so we're very excited about that. And then on the 9th at APCO, I guess this will be the second day of APCO, we're also having a Western States panel to talk a little bit more in depth of what you heard today, and I believe that we will have Arizona with us as well. Quite a few? Oh, good. It's confirmed now. Yeah, and we're working actually directly with APCO to kind of get these things moving forward. Yeah, we're really excited about it. So if there are any other questions before we close today? Thank you all for being here, and thank you for staying for the whole program. This was very important to all of us as we sit up and hear your concerns and comments. So thank you.